this meeting to order, please. Recite the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America
And to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd like to note that all council members are here, establishing a full quorum for the meeting. And I'd like to welcome citizens here tonight who have come to express their desires. Go to the first item on the council agenda is council communication. And we'd like to begin with a report from our city attorney on a matter brought before us by Dr. Young.
Good evening, mayors and members of council. Dr. Young, you were leaning forward expectantly. Was there something you wanted to say to kick this off?
No, I mean, you can, I know you got a presentation that you wanted to give, and I asked for staff to come forward and give us some information. I think for the public, we've had some issues with people camping in public properties, rights of ways, et cetera, which has become an issue and will probably continue to be an issue until us as a body at least address it. But first of all, we need some information in regards to what we can do and what we can't do at this point and how to go forward from there.
Great.
We seem not to be the only place that has an issue, in particularly looking at some codes that many cities don't address it, much like ours.
I agree with what you're saying there. So the topic that we're going to be talking tonight has to do with regulating camping on public property. And I want to talk first kind of what is the issue that's causing this. As Councilman Young has said, I've been contacted by people in the last several weeks about citizens who are camping overnight in our parks, in the streets in our neighborhoods, and in our public thoroughfares, particularly on our transit stops. And I want to be clear that this is not an enforcement issue. It's not a question of whether or not the police department is doing their job. There simply is no ordinance for the police department to enforce with regards to camping in public places. And I suppose I should also say, let's not get hung up on the word camping. We're not talking about Boy Scouts and campfire girls here. This is a homelessness question that we're talking about. We're talking about the community's homeless population. We're talking about people who are sleeping on streets and in our parks because they have no other place to sleep most of the time. So the reason we use the word camping is because that's the vernacular that many cities use to describe this issue in their ordinances. And it's not uncommon for cities to refer to this as camping in public or an anti-camping ordinance. And so that's the phrase that I'm going to use tonight. Our code does have some sections that the police department can enforce. We have a ban on being in the park or cemeteries after hours without an overnight camping permit. And we have a ban on urinating or defecating in public. But beyond that, if a person is merely sleeping on a park bench or in a transit stop, they are not breaking the law, period, full stop. So there is nothing for the police department to enforce. And so what we're talking about tonight is whether or not the city should do something to change that. And more importantly to the topic of this discussion, what could the city do if it wanted to? I want to clarify one thing also before we get started, that I am not talking about private property. This question came up today, and I think it's a good distinction. That private property owners have direct control over their own property. If you don't want Joe Bob sleeping in your front yard, you can tell Joe Bob to leave. It's that simple. If you require the assistance of the police department, police officers are likely to come out to your house and issue what's known as a criminal trespass warning. It's a document that they'll ask you to sign that says you don't want Joe Bob on your property. He's not allowed to be there. They'll issue a copy of that to Joe Bob. They'll keep a copy of it in their files. And the next time that they have to come out to ask Joe Bob to leave your property, they can arrest Joe Bob for the crime of criminal trespass. So there is direct ability for citizens to control their own property. That's not what we're talking about here tonight. What we're talking about here tonight is what are the legal limits of the city's ability to regulate camping on public property. because public property, the streets and rights of way, of course, belong to all citizens, not just the person whose house the road happens to run in front of. So I'm going to take a very broad approach, but I'm limiting it to just that. I'm going to talk about what are the legal boundaries. I want to be clear that I am not making a specific recommendation tonight. I think it would be premature to do that. I will give you a course of action to follow if you decide that you want to move forward with a process. However, what we're really looking for at this point tonight is just an overview of what is allowed and what are the limits, so that we're all on the same page when it comes time to discuss what we think should be done. I will give you some examples, by the way, at the end of this, of what other cities are doing. This is a big picture, important issue. I am not exaggerating when I say it is literally fundamental to what it means to be an American. Remember that the Bill of Rights, which includes the Eighth Amendment, was required to be added to the Constitution before the states would ratify the Constitution. Without these concepts included, the United States would not be what it is. And so I start with that for two reasons. One, I want us to give proper, serious consideration to this topic, but also because the Eighth Amendment happens to be the controlling authority on the answer to this question. The Eighth Amendment reads in full, excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted. And it's the third of those clauses that matters to us for this discussion, what's commonly known as the cruel and unusual punishments clause of the Constitution. The cruel and unusual punishments clause limits the types of punishment that a government may impose. To put it bluntly, we can kill you, but we can't torture you. It proscribes punishments that are grossly disproportionate to the severity of the crime. That is to say, we should not we should not imprison someone for life for their first speeding ticket. That would be disproportionate to the crime. Both of those first limitations, by the way, aren't relevant to this discussion either, because the city of Victoria is limited to only imposing Class C misdemeanor fines, which have a maximum penalty of $500. And so those first two are well beyond the scope of what we're going to be looking at. Our question has to do with the third limitation out of the Eighth Amendment, which is substantive limits on what the government may criminalize. There are some things that simply are not crimes, that the government cannot make a crime because it would violate the Eighth Amendment. And I have no better illustration for that than a quote that comes out of a U.S. Supreme Court case out of 1962 called Robinson versus California, where the Supreme Court said even 1 day in prison would be cruel and unusual punishment for the crime of having a common cold. Yeah, they used air quotes in the 1960s. The crime of having a common cold, because clearly having a cold is not a crime. If you were to try to put someone in prison for that, even 1 day would be cruel and unusual punishment. Robinson versus California is an interesting case. It is the seminal case on what has come to be known as status crimes, and it is the issue that's before us tonight. The state of California had a code, a statute in their penal code that made it illegal, made it a crime, to be addicted to narcotics. Not to possess or use illegal narcotics, but to be addicted to them. Robinson was convicted, and he appealed his crime all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, which threw out the conviction. The U.S. Supreme Court said, think about this for a second. If a woman is addicted to narcotics and she has a baby, the state of California makes that baby a criminal on the day of his birth because he is addicted to the narcotics that his mother used. And that ain't right. That's the idea of a status crime. There are some things you have no control over and therefore cannot be made criminal. I know that it's a touchy subject for many people, whether addiction is a choice or whether it is an illness. And so let me contrast the Robinson opinion with another U.S. Supreme Court case that came out 6 years later out of Texas. A man named Powell was arrested for what we would today call public intoxication. And he thought, hey, I'm a drunk. I am a chronic alcoholic, and that's an illness. You can't penalize me for that. Go see Robinson. His lawyers appealed his case all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. 6 years after Robinson, the case of Powell versus Texas, the Supreme Court said Powell was convicted not for being a chronic alcoholic, but for being in public while he was drunk. The court analyzed the case and said, you know what? There's nothing in the record that says that Powell could not have chosen to be drunk in his own living room. We don't know what Mrs. Powell thought of that. But the court record said he could have chosen to be in private. He chose to be in public, and that made this not a status crime. It is a crime involving his own conduct. And that's the distinction that we need to pay attention to when we're analyzing this question of homelessness and sleeping in public. Now, what's the connection between alcohol and drugs and homelessness? There have been 4 cases recorded where someone was arrested for violating an anti-camping ordinance, and they appealed their case. Those cases came out of California, Idaho, Texas, and Florida. All 4 of those courts analyzed it according to this analysis of status versus conduct crime, and all 4 of those courts shot down the ordinance, declared them unconstitutional, and invalidated the criminal conviction. So we want to look at what those courts have said before we start trying to decide what we can impose in our own ordinance if we choose to write one. So let's look at the case out of Florida, which I think is the most instructive. You had a group of homeless individuals who were challenging the ordinance because they said they were homeless and that this was essentially a status crime. The court said resisting the need to eat or sleep is impossible. Avoiding public places when sleeping, for these plaintiffs, is also impossible. As long as the homeless plaintiffs do not have a single place where they can lawfully be, the challenged ordinances as applied to them effectively punish them for something which they may not be convicted of under the Eighth Amendment. Homelessness, in the minds of those courts, is a status, as is sleeping. And so if you're banning those 2 things together, it's a status crime. But do you see the big loophole in the middle? For those people who are going to say that these people are choosing to sleep in public, it's not a status, it's a conduct crime. Look at the big loophole in the middle. It gives you a lot of ground to argue this. I'll highlight it for you. As long as the homeless plaintiffs do not have a single place where they can lawfully be. If they have no control over their situation, then it's a status crime. But if, like Powell, they can choose to do that in their living room, then it's a choice, and it can be criminalized. Those 4 cases establish the rule that I'm about to go over that sets the boundaries of what what cities can do when they're adopting these kinds of regulations. 2 things have to be true.
Excuse me, real quick.
Yes, sir.
Clarification, what court was that?
That's the Southern District of Florida. Yes, Southern District of Florida in 1992.
Takes care of what district, what states does it take care of?
That is only Florida, only the
Okay.
southern half of Florida.
Okay, it's just a Florida.
The case
court.
out of Texas arose in Dallas.
Okay,
And I believe it was a Northern District of Texas case that was appealed to the Fifth Circuit.
Okay.
It was vacated on other grounds.
But it was vacated.
It was vacated, that is correct.
so that case right there in Southern District of Florida has no jurisdiction in Texas.
That's correct.
Okay,
That's correct. If you want to be technical, and I'm sure you do, it sounds like your questions are being highly technical here. Let's put it in black and white on the table. There is no controlling legal opinion in Texas that says what I'm telling you today. What I'm telling you today is based on my research of the entire country's laws and the way the U.S. Supreme Court has ruled on this issue. Remember, each of these courts in these other jurisdictions is interpreting the United States Constitution, which does apply in Texas. If there were a split of opinions where Texas ruled one thing, Florida ruled something different, then I would be much more inclined to say there's an open question about whether or not we can do something. But when only 4 courts have analyzed the situation and they all concluded the same thing, I'm pretty well convinced. Yes, sir.
Were those 4 other ordinances that you mentioned, they were in multiple jurisdictions across the country, right?
Yes, one was the one in California was out of Los Angeles. The one out of Idaho was Boise. The one out of Texas was Dallas. And here you have the city of Miami out of
But
Florida.
those made it all the way to Supreme Court?
No, they made it to their respective federal
Okay.
courts. None of them have made it all the way to the Supreme Court. Well, we really are getting a legal education tonight. All right.
Thomas,
ma'am.
I don't know when's the right time to ask this question, but I realize that I'm listening to everything that you're saying, but I'm thinking a little bit differently perhaps than the rest of council, because I'm thinking about your presentation about camping. You're talking about, what we can and cannot enforce.
Yes.
But I'm thinking broader in terms of an ordinance that would not just cover city right-of-way, but that would also cover private property. And so I'm listening to that, and this ordinance that we might or might not propose, would there be a distinction? I don't really think there would. I feel like if we proposed an ordinance, that it could cover private property as well. And that's significant to me because you talked earlier about that private property was completely different. They could say, I want this person to move. But truly, to the satisfaction of that neighborhood, all that may happen is the person move to the next house over and start over again. And so I'm really thinking on a broader basis of both public and private property. I don't know if that changes things a lot, but I don't think it does. And so I just wanted to kind of throw that out there and see if that does change anything that you're saying.
It does to some very minor extent. I think that you're right, that the analysis that we're talking about here today isn't really impacted by whether or not you guys consider an ordinance that would prohibit camping in someone's private front yard, okay? I don't think that the analysis has changed. However, the place that I think it does change the analysis, in just a second when I talk about what the rule is, I'm not sure that courts would uphold a rule that effectively forced homeless people into citizens' front yards. And let me expand on that a little bit on the next slide when I get into that, because it'll make more sense when I get there, okay? All right. So here's what the rule is. All of that esoteric constitutional law behind us, here's the rule. The city can regulate camping in public property so long as one of these two things is true. First, that there are adequate beds available in homeless shelters for all homeless individuals. If Powell could get drunk in his living room, it was a choice for him to be in public. If a person has a bed to sleep in, then it is their choice to camp in public. You follow the logic? The second option is that there remain alternative public property locations in which citizens are allowed to camp. You can say, for example, it is legal for people to camp in a particular park or in a particular location. Here's where Ms. Scott's point comes in. The rule is that there be alternative places available on public property. The reason it says on public property is because the government is not allowed to force you to accept someone onto your property that you don't want to be there. It's a separate constitutional issue called the quartering of soldiers. You remember that issue, right? So we can't force homeless people onto the private property of another person. As long as there is adequate public property locations available, then I don't think that we're impacted if we regulate private property. But I don't think that we can force homeless individuals onto the private property as our alternative location. I hope that makes sense. Yes, sir.
If there was alternate public property locations
Yes.
for people to camp, do the restrictions and ordinances we have, which I think you said against public urination and defecation, are they still
Those would still apply.
enforceable?
That's absolutely correct. You would say, in effect, that people are not allowed to camp in these locations, but they are in those. While they are in those locations, all of the other laws of the city still apply, including the prohibitions on defecation and urination.
Thomas,
Yes.
this was the finding of the Ninth Circuit, correct? This came out of that Boise, Idaho case.
This is This is the rule that came out of the Boise, Idaho case. Yes, it is also the rule that came out of the Texas case, the Florida case, and the California case.
But I thought you said that it was vacated in Texas.
In Texas, it has been vacated on other grounds, yes.
So we don't have a ruling out
That's
of the.
correct.
I'm trying to wrap my head around that we don't have a ruling. It was vacated, but yet we have a rule.
Yes, we do. Because courts have consistently interpreted the U.S. Constitution, and the U.S. Constitution does apply in Texas.
How can we have so many cities with different rules?
Great transition. Let me show you the next slide.
You're welcome.
I did a very cursory survey of the 10 largest cities in the state. I am not proclaiming to be an expert on what every one of these cities has done, but these 6 cities, I was able to quickly find what their ordinance said. And you'll notice I was able to easily categorize them according to whether or not they allowed adequate beds or whether they allowed adequate additional places. So in the city of Dallas, their code says it's illegal to sleep in any public place. But if you follow the news, Dallas is currently investing $100 million into a homeless shelter that they intend to provide beds for their homeless community. San Antonio prohibits camping in any public place except certain designated areas. But San Antonio also has Haven for Hope, a $101 million facility that they created to be a one-stop shop to service the needs of the homeless population. Laredo, I want to say little Laredo in comparison to those other cities. Laredo is one of the 10 biggest cities in the state now. Laredo prohibits camping anywhere in their city, but they also provide homeless beds through an organization called Bethany House. On the other hand, you have places like Houston. I was unable to find anything about Houston providing homeless beds, so I've put them in the places location. Their code says that camping is prohibited in parks except for designated overnight camping locations. And so you see, by carving out that exception, they're saying there are some places that are available. Austin, of course, recently changed their code, and they now essentially allow camping on all public place. I know they have a slight carve out for City Hall, and I think this probably also does not include most of the parks. But in the city of Austin, you're allowed to camp on any sidewalk so long as you are not completely blocking the sidewalk or are a danger to yourself or others. And even then, it's not a crime until the police come and ask you to move and you refuse. So the city of Austin has essentially opened its doors to people camping on the streets. And then the city of Corpus Christi, I saved them for last. I think Corpus Christi's ordinance is the most easily defensible ordinance in the state. Their ordinance says clearly on the books in black and white, you can camp in these areas, you cannot camp in those areas. And it's a geographical boundary. It's like, I don't remember the name of the place. I'm probably going to get this wrong, the North Beach area. But then it goes on to say, bounded by the streets of, and it actually lays out where you're allowed to be and where you're not allowed to be. And so it's very easy for a person to know whether or not it's legal or illegal. So I really like Corpus Christi's ordinance. But I think you all can tell that this is not going to be an easy road to go down, regardless of which direction you want to go. You're either talking about guaranteeing that beds are available, or you're talking about guaranteeing that certain places are available. And so it's going to be a difficult discussion. I said I would give you a process to go forward. And I've had this conversation with some of you already. Last time I was up here at the dais, I talked about council's role in strategic planning, strategic development, looking forward at the big picture policy guidance. What I think council needs to do today is to give big picture policy guidance to staff. Do you believe the city should be involved in regulating? Do you believe that we should look at a beds policy or a places policy? But then I think you should turn it over to staff to develop what the details of that regulation would look like. You have an excellently talented staff, starting with a city manager who has experience both in San Antonio and Kingsville dealing with issues like this. You have a police chief who has dealt with homeless issues in Long Beach, California before coming here and dealing with Victoria's issues. and you have a city attorney who I'll humbly say taught this course to the other city attorneys around the state. You've got a good team. Let us bring back a recommendation that will meet your broad policy goals. Then you can approve that plan or suggest changes to it, and staff can go out and implement it. I'll take any questions you have.
On your options slide,
Yes.
you have on there the two things, there are alternative public property locations in which citizens are allowed to camp.
Yes.
Does that mean that the alternative public property locations have to be in Victoria?
Within your jurisdiction.
Austin is a
If you-
great place.
Austin seems to be a great place, and if you had a fun bus ticket, they're opened everywhere.
That's a great question, Jeff, and I do know that I have not seen that language included in any of the ordinances that I've looked at. I've also not seen it in any of the court cases. So from this standpoint of what are the legal boundaries, I have to simply say I don't know.
Go ahead. I'm sorry,
Go
Mr. Mayor.
ahead.
No, I know you brought up the top 10 cities. It's probably the easiest. I did a quick look, and I think we're number 56th in the state.
That sounds about right.
We don't have a tax base that can afford a $100 million homeless shelter. That sounds very nice. That's not us. And so it's very difficult to compare us to Dallas, to Austin, to San Antonio from that standpoint. I just don't feel like we'd be doing our residents any good by saying, I'm sorry, those roads that we've put off on your CIP, we're just not going to do that. I just don't see that as an option, unfortunately.
From my perspective, I see no problem with our staff moving forward to develop. Obviously, you've done extensive research into developing an ordinance for us to consider, which you've cited the strengths and weaknesses of certain ordinances, but to try to prepare one, and while we're in that process of the staff preparing this, it'll give us time as a community to come together about what these alternatives could be. We have a wonderful community with a lot of faith-based organizations. First Methodist Church comes to mind. They're trying to provide facilities for people to bathe and to clean themselves up, and trying to find ways. We have the University of Houston conducted 2 seminars on homelessness. And I think while these ordinances are being developed, we can look to coalescing the people within our community that are familiar with the subject to where we can perhaps develop an alternative that we can live with that won't cost $100 million, but serve as an alternative. But, and I think Austin's solution by just making it legal is sticking their head in the sand, because they're saying, we don't want to tackle the problem. And I don't think Victoria is that type of community. I think we have a community that cares for one another. And I don't think an out of sight, out of mind solution to the problem is necessarily where we want to go. But we do have people with an issue before us, our citizens that have an issue that's affecting them, and it's not affecting them in a positive way. So again, I see no problem moving forward with developing an ordinance, because I think an ordinance is the only avenue we have to deal with it, right or wrong, whether it gets tested or not. I think we've got to develop something, but I would just like to see us in the meanwhile go back to our stakeholders in our community who are experts in this as well, in homelessness, Gulf Bend, all these organizations, and try to coalesce them in a fashion where we can hopefully come up with that alternate solution.
Mr. Mayor, what do you do when somebody doesn't want help and they're sleeping on the right-of-way? Because that's
Well-
what's happening in my neighborhood.
But the thing is, if I understand right, as long as there's an avenue available and they refuse to take it, I think they're in violation of an ordinance. As long as if I understand what you're saying. If you don't provide that alternative somehow, then
We already
it's not-
do.
Well, but what I'm saying is, at that point in time, you enforce the ordinance.
Well, then,
For them not to accept the help that's there is a violation of that ordinance. And I guess you would prosecute them to whatever extent the law would allow in that ordinance.
Well, I have some constituents on the north side also that are having problems, and we need to enforce the criminal trespass ordinances that we have out there right now. It's my opinion that high-quality video evidence where you can actually make out who it is enough evidence to present that criminal trespass warning and get the person taken care of that, number one, doesn't want help, but can't tear up the place while he's scrounging for stuff
I
and make
get those
trash.
same pictures.
Right? So, number one, let's enforce what we have right now. Let's find a way to be compassionate. And remember, homeless are part of our community, but it is a public space. They need to have some decorum and rules to follow too, to make sure that that taxpayer-funded public space is enjoyed by all. It's not just theirs to do with like they want. It's also the other citizens that they need to respect as well. Homeless need to be respected too, but there's got to be a set of rules for all to be able to enjoy it. It's
Yeah.
not just a wild, wild west if you're on a public space.
Hence, moving forward with an ordinance.
Yes, I like Sugarlands.
And I do still suggest that we think seriously about perhaps a slightly different angle of it, but private property. Because, let's hit it head on. We're sitting here today saying we're going to pass an ordinance for public property. I think we have some very caring, well-meaning people in our community that could very quickly say, come on to my land. End of discussion. Well, we have rules for manufactured home parks. We have rules for various types of parks. We don't have a rule for a public camping park. We don't have that problem right now today, but that doesn't mean that it wouldn't take very much for us to have it. So I really want us to consider camping in the city limits. Now, of course, again, I'm not talking about the Boy Scouts. I'm not talking about when I want to pitch a tent in the backyard and let my grandkids sleep there. I'm talking about some opening up a space for someone to just come and camp without providing any types of facilities for their own private, personal decency as well as the community around.
I thought we had that, and Ms. Fulgham could probably answer, in the Unified Development Code, because didn't we have to suspend some of those rules after Harvey because people were fixing their house and they were living outside in a tent, and we had to suspend some of the rules so that people could get their houses repaired while they stayed in a tent outside? Am I remembering that
We
right?
suspended the length of
Remembering
time
right.
for RVs,
I
yes.
remember RVs, which is a whole different,
Right, and I
that has
believe the time
facilities.
limit in there, and Julie may be able to correct me if I get this wrong, I believe the time limit in there is like 10 days or so. We're not talking about a single overnight incident, we're talking about an extended stay.
Thomas, oh, I'm sorry. go
I
ahead.
would, I would support that so that you don't end up with a private parcel that has tents everywhere and it just turns to trash and no place for restrooms.
I mean, if we're going to have something like that, either we say, no, we're not going to have it, or that there are some strict rules about what, the facility has to be like.
Well, I think the citizens look to us to make this corporate decision on their behalf. And we've started with a lot of obvious research on the subject. And once again, I think I would be in favor of having staff move forward with ordinances to bring back to us. Now, it may, as those are developed, it may require that we come back in a work session and discuss them. But I think if we're going to do this, we ought to make every effort to do it as well as we can, and for it to be as permanent a solution as we can devise at this point in time.
I'd like it to
yet-
be as quickly as possible
Well,
too, based
yes.
upon the level of people that are here in
That's
the
right,
audience.
that's right. I'm not talking about dragging this thing out for months, but
Because people are defecating and urinating
right.
in my neighborhood.
I understand. But there's
You have to catch
already
'em.
an ordinance against that, I understand.
You have to
too.
catch them.
Well,
I don't think we have the resources for the police to sit there and watch somebody
Well, if-
24/7.
again, if we move them, where are they gonna move to?
Hence, we have to have an ordinance.
Out of
I
sight, out of
have to agree
mind.
with the mayor,
So,
but I also have to make a statement that we need to have two separate ordinances or make sure that our city code does not infringe on private properties or the owners of private properties. Again, many of us own homes and land here in Victoria.
right,
Don't want someone coming in saying, well, you can't do this on your property, you can't do that with your property. So one has to be a public ordinance or concerning the homeless
well,
or camping in public, but the other has to be our city codes and our code enforcement group that we have enforcing what you can and can't do on your on your own land.
Along with Laredo, Sugarland has a pretty restrictive camping ordinance as well, I understand.
I understand that. Do you know whether they provide alternatives in
It does not
beds
say.
or in other places?
It does not say.
Let me
I think
understand.
I think Sugarland's proximity to Houston, I think, helps them.
Right.
I've been kind of Googling since I was aware that Sugarland had come up, and I think they utilize their resources through the Houston area. The Houston area has a big coalition for the homeless that includes the surrounding areas as well, and so I think they
Can we
leverage
utilize
that.
Austin's?
I don't know if there's a distance limitation on that. You know, I really have no idea. I could tell
That
you
was
that
tongue in
I could
cheek,
tell you that
but-
in Kingsville, for example, we did leverage the resources through Corpus Christi. And so there were instances where, even though we were, gosh, I don't know, 35 miles away or whatever it was from Corpus Christi, we were able to leverage some of those resources out of Corpus Christi. And so oftentimes we would have to find ways to transport the homeless from Kingsville to Corpus Christi. But again, it's 30 miles, you know, and so I don't know. But also there wasn't a huge homelessness issue, you know, we had 3, you know. So it wasn't a significant issue to the degree that it would force us to have conversations about shelters and things of that sort.
Well, and this conversation is to, one, we have a problem. It's a small problem, but we'd also like to address it before it becomes a huger problem for our
Right.
community.
Yeah, and it sounds like the policy direction from council is really twofold. One is to try and develop an ordinance that addresses the immediate need. And then secondly, looking at something more long-term, sounds like. Ultimately, at some point, and we'd be happy to put together some recommendations for discussion's sake, but ultimately, the immediate need is only gonna be addressed via having an ordinance that allows it in some places and doesn't in other places. And so, again, we'd be happy to put together something for discussion's sake. But ultimately, if the desire is to do a solution soon, this council will have to decide on which areas are okay and which are not.
Yeah, let's ask that question. Does anybody want a public camping place in their district? Okay,
Right.
I have a question. Okay, so you said the two different things that we could do was the beds or the places. The beds is gonna be out of our range because of the cost. So are the only things that's left is the places for us to choose from?
Well, I don't know that it's necessarily the case that beds are going to be out of range because of our cost. I used the 2 numbers that I knew of from San Antonio and Dallas, both of which were about $1 million. Obviously, those cities are much larger, have much greater needs, and they built facilities that are substantially beyond anything the city of Victoria would need. I know that some cities rely on their community partners
Right.
to provide that. I can tell you that within the city of Boise, Idaho, for example, each of the homeless shelters that was privately run in town reported to the police department every night how many beds they had available. And that was their attempt to try to make sure that they only enforced their ordinance on nights where there were beds available, and therefore the homeless people were making a choice to sleep outside. There are some problems with an approach like that. There are a lot of problems with an approach like that. But I don't want to scare off anyone by believing that we would have to spend $100 million, because whoever said it is exactly right. That's probably beyond the scope of what Victoria.
And oftentimes, just for further context, so some communities have, for example, we have the CDBG process, right? So some communities have chosen to invest some of their CDBG dollars into shelters. Some communities have chosen to invest some of their CDBG program dollars to help support homeless shelters. Some do it strictly out of general fund. Coincidentally, I was having a conversation with a colleague from the city of Harlingen, which size-wise is comparable to us. They contribute over $100,000 a year out of just their general fund to assist the operation of the homeless shelter in Harlingen. So it's possible, and other smaller communities are playing a role in providing the beds. But obviously it takes a community partner. Laredo, for instance, has, I think it was a Salvation Army that you mentioned.
Yes, and Bethany House
And-
as well.
Yeah, and so it's definitely not something that we can do on our own. Even some of these large entities, San Antonio, they didn't do it on their own either. And so it's definitely not something that we, by ourselves, will be able to solve. But there's definitely cities out there that are being a partner in that solution through funding.
Well, may I suggest that as we go through the process and we start working on this ordinance, that we communicate whoever has a homeless shelter right now, that we can see if we can partner up with them and find out what we can help ourselves with, so we don't have to fund the whole project, but at least have something available.
And that's exactly what I was trying to allude to.
Exactly.
Yes.
Is that while we're doing this, we get into serious conversation with those groups within our community who are really more familiar with the homeless than any of us are, and start working with them to help bring that alternate solution, that's a community solution, but in partnership with what the city's doing. In other words, we need to go to them and challenge them to assist us in solving this problem. But in the meanwhile, we can move forward with our ordinances and get serious about it.
I just have grave concerns over a public place, as nobody raised their hand on this dais about wanting it in their district.
We can look at whatever properties the city has that are open, and Julie has a list, and whatever is more centrally located I'm willing to put up something in my district that would be available to somebody that's not, close to somewhere where they could go and stay. I don't see why we can't do that. Even if it's an old building that we could rehab with CDBG money or something like that, I don't
Rehabbing
mind.
an old building's expensive.
Well, maybe we can do a PSA.
Well,
We have all of our ordinances, and if we're going to provide housing, everybody's everybody's entitled to the same type, quality construction that they're going to stay in. It's not a question of just converting an old building and calling it done.
Well, you were talking about parks for camping. It's, raw land. Put some portable potties up there, and I know they have portable showers they can put out there, especially during, like the summer when it's real hot or real cold, at least those times.
I
mean,
don't
there's-
disagree with you. It's just that as soon as it's something that the governmental agencies are providing, then all of a sudden, it's got to be
floodgate.
funded, it's got to be, top quality,
And to the point that was just made, that does happen. When communities open homeless shelters, there are people that come in from outside the community to utilize those services, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And that's part of the reason why it's important to have a community nonprofit partner. And even if the city is contributing towards the effort, you're not fully funding or fully supporting that operation, because there would be people that aren't residents of our community that would utilize those resources. So that's why entities like Salvation Army and others typically are the more appropriate to run these shelters.
Well, and if we accept Mr. Gush's analysis that this is a requirement based upon his understanding of federal law and the cases he's prescribed, if we're going to develop an ordinance along those lines, I see no reason why that ordinance can't start being developed to bring back. The issue of how we handle the other side of it to make it legal or more, or less challengeable is still a discussion that needs to be had. And it needs to be had throughout our community. And whether it's an alternate place or whether we can go to people within our community that are more familiar with this. Like I said, the university started a whole discussion on homelessness.
Sure.
And when I go there, there's all these agencies, there's like 6 agencies that deal with it. So I think we need to go to them and ask them to partner with us in coming up with that alternative solution.
No, I love our agencies. They do a wonderful job. But if I'm asking the attorney and staff to come up with draft an ordinance, I wanted to see mimicking Laredo or Sugar Land's ordinance.
My deal is, I don't see anything that's come out of the fifth district,
Fifth Circuit.
Fifth Circuit, sorry. So we're not bound by anything else.
Except the Eighth Amendment to the U.S.
Yes.
Constitution.
So, but we're not California and we're not Miami.
We're not Miami, we're not
I
California.
understand, but
Until it goes before the Fifth Circuit,
Sugar Land, yeah.
Well, the
their
language,
ruling doesn't have bearing on us.
the language of a lot of these ordinances don't mention that alternative.
No, it doesn't.
But-
And it hasn't
but-
gone before the Fifth
But if
Circuit.
there is an alternative there, then you have it in your back pocket if you're ever challenged. I don't think the ordinance necessarily has to state that fact, does it?
Has to state which fact.
That what alternatives we're offering.
I don't believe that has to be
No.
spelled out in the ordinance as
Right.
clearly as Corpus Christi does. However, you do have to factually have an alternative available. If you were to say in your ordinance, for example, that it's prohibited everywhere except in designated overnight camping locations like Houston, and then you never issued a camping permit or allowed someone to camp overnight, or didn't actually designate a location, then your ordinance is a mere fiction. You have to actually back that up with what you're doing in the city.
But I think we do have beds. I know there are nights when they're not open, and I was impressed actually with that comment of, finding out the nights that there are no beds available. But we have a lot of organizations, not millions, but we have a number of organizations that have shelters and that have beds and that affect or that deal with various aspects of homelessness. We have a
Yes.
wellness community. We have various shelters as well.
Yes.
And the wellness community, I was just there last week, that's not for the homeless.
No.
So that's
Well-
in transition housing, so it's different. And
Right.
just throwing that out there, because I don't want people to think that's for the homeless, because it's not.
Okay.
I
think
did
that-
really think that Boise's approach was creative, and I think that there's a lot of potential there. Knowing what the court saw as problematic in Boise's ordinance, we could certainly look at avoiding those problematic areas and bringing back something along those lines. But like I say, there were a lot of problems with that particular ordinance, so it would require some creative thinking.
I would just, there are different causes of homelessness. And I think the wellness community has actually solved one of those problems for some of our citizens. And so, yes, you're right, it's not an overnight shelter, but it is a longer-term solution for the right people in the right circumstances.
Right.
I hear you. Well, thank you, Mayor and Council, and I will conclude by saying I recognize it's a lot easier to be on this side of the dais and to say, I don't have to make a recommendation. You guys have some hard work to do to come up with what the decision will be, and I do applaud you all for choosing to wade into a very difficult subject.
As a way of giving direction, does anyone have issue with staff going back and drafting ordinance to bring back to us?
Only if they take a long time doing it.
Well, then, I can direct that to our city manager.
Could I ask a
Something by the August
question?
meeting?
If you're camping, and you're camping in a state park, you need a permit. Can you make it, you have to have a permit to camp in the city? I'm just throwing this out there. I'm not saying it's the solution. I'm just asking a question.
You can. you can certainly say that that activity is by permit only. However, then you're going to have to issue that permit to everyone who asks for it. If
Well, you can charge for the permit, right?
Now, that's a very interesting question because at some point, financial hardship is going to be a status rather than conduct.
But if I go to a state park, I can't say, well, I don't have enough money to pay for my parking permit.
That's probably true, but for most people, they don't have to choose to stay overnight in a state park.
True.
They can choose to stay on the public road outside of the state park if they don't have enough money.
Okay.
As long as they're not in Laredo or Sugar Land.
That's right.
Okay.
So can we have a draft that first meeting in August?
I think
Your
we're
call.
looking at each other
Your call.
because I think
I'm,
there are a
I'm,
lot
I'm,
of
I don't give you,
unknowns.
yeah, I don't give you a direct answer because I'm unclear as to what the expectation of council is on this topic, right? Because I'm hearing that you want an ordinance that prohibits it soon, right? But at the same time, you know, our city attorney, which he's my city attorney too, right? I'm not here to contradict our city attorney. Our city attorney's position and direction on this matter is that the only way for us to accomplish this is to either solve the beds issue or to have locations around town to allow it. And so I just want to make sure that the expectations are clear that if what council wants to see is something that comes back in early August, we're obviously not going to figure out the beds issue by early August. And so the only option under the parameters established by our city attorney would be for us to have certain areas of town where it's allowed versus not.
Not if
Now-
we go with, not if we go with Sugar Land or Laredo's thing.
Well, remember, Laredo's solution is alternative beds available. I don't know what Sugar Land has.
We have
available.
alternative beds available, possibly. Do we know the open beds count right now?
I do not.
Neither do I. So we could possibly have that.
If your ordinance ensures that there are adequate beds available, the dangerous word there is ensures.
And I think we also, one of the things to consider too is, and I don't know the answer, you know, I don't know to what extent the agencies have beds. Obviously, and sometimes you have shelters that are just for women, as an example. So yeah, you might have that tackles that. But is there a men's, you know, is there one that takes families? And so it's not a one-size-fits-all sort of shelter either. And so I don't know the answer to those questions. I know that, as the mayor suggested, UHV hosted a roundtable earlier today, and even just Googling now, you know, reading some of the articles specific to the beds, it sounds like there's a need for beds in our community based on what I've read. And so, again, that's not an issue that's gonna be solved by the first meeting in August. I think it's great that it seems like the direction is for us to be engaged with these groups and engaged in the conversation. And obviously, that's exciting for us, right, to address the core issue. But again, if the expectation from council is to have a solution in August, that's only gonna be in the form of allowing it in some areas and not in others, based on the position of our city attorney.
That's based on a Ninth Circuit Court decision. Show me the Fifth Circuit Court cases that deal with this, that say this has to be done.
I understand your position. You're trying to back me into a corner, and I've already clearly answered the question. There is no controlling law in the state of Texas issued by a court in the Fifth Circuit. Nevertheless, all of the courts that are interpreting this are interpreting the U.S. Constitution, which does apply in Texas.
It's their interpretation. It's not our Fifth Circuit's interpretation, which I think
Agreed.
has a different makeup than other courts. Hence, that's why I don't think there's something coming out of the Fifth Circuit. I think they're
Yeah, and
probably a little
from,
different
and from
interpretation. of
And
it.
from this discussion, you know, there are some things that we could go back and do more research on. As an example, you know, some of the questions that I think we could do some more research on are, you know, you asked the question about if you offer the alternative, you know, where does that have to be, right? We could probably do some research on that. We could probably do some research on some of the more, for lack of better terms, rural standalone communities that exist across the state, because obviously there's several. You know, what do they do, right? You know, your sort of your San Angelo, you know, Lubbock, some of these communities that don't really have a big metro area like Houston that Sugar Land could leverage, or that Kingsville could leverage Corpus. you know, we don't have something that close, so we can do some research on what some of those communities do and kind of come back with more specifics so that there's more clarity behind, while yes, Laredo does it, while yes, Sugar Land does it, well, it's because of X, Y, and Z, right? Because it isn't one size fits all.
And you may find that these places don't have it because they haven't addressed it like us,
That they don't have shelters, you mean?
that they don't have an ordinance or they don't
Oh,
have.
some of the other ones? Some of the other communities? Yeah,
Correct.
maybe. I don't know.
We don't know.
Yeah, I
till
don't
we
know.
find out.
Well, I did some research. You look up camping, it didn't come up.
Got it.
I'm going to make a comment. I'm going to reserve my decision till after the citizens' communication on homelessness in Victoria is, after we do that communication, and see whether we can add to this topic of anti-camping, because I think that's going to be part of our answer. Because somebody else out there has some answers on the homelessness, how many beds, if there is any facilities.
yeah.
And I'm hoping that, you know, when they come up to the microphone, they'll let us know, so we can decide, okay, I know we can partner with the beds, or do we go with the, you know, places? You know, just to kind of give us a better idea, because as a community, you can give us input that will help us up here decide which way we can better serve the community.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I have no problem with that. I just, in just closing of this discussion, unless anybody else has something, I just want to make sure that we do our due diligence and we come up with something that is permanent, a solution as we can find. That's defensible in the best we can. I mean, and I understand, Dr. King, you've dealt with it more one-on-one than myself. I mean, I've had pictures and stuff, and I can appreciate, you know, your urgency. But I still think we need to do our due diligence and do this properly and come up with a deal that is workable for everybody.
And to add to that, if there are existing homeless that are behaving in a way that's already inconsistent with some of our laws and ordinances, I'd be happy to work with the police chief to find a way to address the immediate concerns that are already in violation of and against the law of some of the things that we do. I'd be happy to have that conversation with the chief, and hopefully bring some closure to some of the immediate concerns, because that is a concern of mine, right? You know, if there's already some illegal, for lack of a better term, behavior taking place, well, I also want to make sure that we're doing the best we can to enforce our existing laws and our existing ordinances. And so I'd be happy to have that conversation with the chief as well.
Appreciate it.
Okay. Any other items from council?
Yes. I'd like to thank OC for, I understand we're live today. And I would like to thank him. If you go to Channel 15 on your guide, you can see now when council meetings are, when planning commission meetings are, et cetera. It's in the guide. Also, if you go to the website under government, there is a link, you can click on it, and you can actually go to our meetings online on YouTube. So there's a lot of ways that you can actually go back and revisit everything that was said in this meeting. So, thank you, OC. The second thing I'd like to bring up is, on the August 20th meeting, we have talked about work sessions. And I'd like to have a work session where we just come together on some topics and then put them on a calendar so that we can get into some work sessions. I understand this is an important topic, and it would be, to me, it would be good if we got the Homeless Coalition, some homeless people who have a stake in it, to come and talk at the next meeting. But I would like on the August 20th meeting for us to have a work session where we can actually talk about what we would like to have work sessions on. And then put it on a calendar. That's
Fair
it.
enough.
I have an item, and this really has been in the back of my mind before I saw the agenda. But a couple of months ago, I brought up a proposal of a sign, just sort of a public information sign about panhandling that says that panhandling is not safe And I forget the wording, I can find it again, but there are better ways to give, find a safer way to give. And I think council liked that concept of signs, and I kind of envision them as on city-looking, City of Victoria logo on them or something. We ran into a little snag that apparently the major intersections of TxDOT properties, we can't put them there. But we have a lot of intersections in this community that are not TxDOT-controlled intersections. And whether or not, I'm not suggesting one in the middle of a subdivision, but we have some intersections, I keep coming back to Mockingbird and Laurent. And everybody says, well, we haven't necessarily seen a problem there. Well, that's true, we haven't. But we didn't have a problem with camping a few months ago. And so I'd still like to encourage us to find some locations and put those signs up. And staff told us that they can probably design them. So I'd like to just keep that on the forefront or ask that move to the next step of getting those things designed and identifying some places for them.
Did they give you a distance from the intersection?
There's a distance of, it's either 100 feet or I think it's 100 feet. So approaching an intersection, it could still be, but they didn't want it to block.
Yeah,
Go.
from a TxDOT intersection, if you were to go back onto city property, you'd have to get off the TxDOT intersection. I think that's usually around 50 feet, give or take. But from just a strict City of Victoria intersection like the one Ms. Scott mentioned, we would just need to look at each one and see how it lays out so that we're not blocking line of sight.
Because even 50 feet would give you enough as you slow to an intersection.
I believe so, yes, sir.
Well, and also just food for thought, right? If the idea is to put these panhandling signs, you also want to make sure that besides the line of sight, looking to sign clutter and things of that sort,
Right.
are there existing pools that we can take advantage of, so all of that should be part of the,
Oh, absolutely.
part of the conversation.
Yeah, we'll look for some other options also and maybe do some additional research, see if any other communities have, what they've done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further items from council? Comments? Seeing none, I'll move into citizen communication. And we have an item, I think, that was asked by Ms. Edwards to be put on the agenda concerning homelessness. I would ask that everybody that comes to the mic, if you will limit your conversations or your remarks to 5 minutes. I'm now the kind of clock keeper on that, and about 20 seconds in, I'll raise the gavel to kind of give you an idea to wrap it up, because we have a lot of people here tonight. We need to hear a lot of opinions.
Would you
So
also explain that we don't respond back or answer questions?
that's typically, we do not respond back. We're here for your information, and then we'll discuss the matter and we'll bring it back at other ideas. But it's very important that we hear from the public when we're contemplating these matters. So with that, I will begin. Anyone wanting to speak, please step forward and give your name and address for the record.
Hello. Is that good?
Yes.
My name is Kathleen Edwards. I live at 502 North Craig. And before I begin my presentation, I would like to address Jan Scott and say that I've heard many positive things tonight, which are encouraging. There is one thing that I did some research on in relation to your idea about signs for panhandling, which is something I had thought was a very good idea. And these are statistics I acquired, not out of thin air, but from the Advocate and other resources. In this city, there are approximately 225 homeless people. 125 of which live off the, out of shelters and on the streets and in our neighborhoods and wherever. And they are what I would consider chronic homeless. which means they don't want help. They're very content where they are, as unbelievable as that is to us. They don't want to stop doing drugs. They don't want to stop their lifestyle. They do, in fact, siphon off a staggering amount of money from good-hearted citizens who mistakenly think that they are solving a problem. For example, it is a fact that they earn each between $500 and $1,000 a day panhandling. There is one man who you can find regularly under Zach Lynn's freeway who does not, I don't know where he gets his money, but he makes $36,000 a year panhandling. If you take the 125 chronic homeless that live on the streets and you put the pencil to it, $75 a day, $750 a day each equals $97,750 a day. You multiply that by 30, and you have $2,812,500 a day. You multiply that by 365 days, and you have $33,750,000 a year. These are funds that we would weep for. And I think public education is pivotal in helping to alleviate the problems and the suffering. The simple fact is that there are certain people who will not and refuse to accept help, whether they're hardened drug users, criminals, mentally ill. That is a fact that is inconceivable, but we cannot avoid realizing. So having said that, I want to thank you for your forward-thinking idea, and also I would like to read my remarks, which will not run over 5 minutes. And I hope that, based on what I've heard today, I will have addressed some of the things that have come up prior to my standing here. As I said, I'm Kathleen Edwards, and I thank you sincerely for this opportunity to address you all. I have respect and admiration for what you do, and I realize the difficulty in trying to walk the walk and talk the talk. To begin with, I would confess that since I began researching the individual that has taken up residence on our sidewalk in our neighborhood in historic Victoria for the past 2 months, I have learned a great deal about homelessness and mental health issues in our community. I have spoken to law enforcement, to the sheriff, to my neighbors. I have done my own personal research, and I have learned how this individual arrived at this place in their life. And it is a sad and predictable situation based on the background. What I have noticed since I began this, after talking extensively with my neighbors and law enforcement, is that
Ma'am,
one homeless person.
If I may,
Yes.
there's about 20 seconds left. Now, I would ask council.
Is that 5 minutes?
Yes, ma'am. I would ask council that since Ms. Edwards brought this up and it's on the agenda, I would have no problem in allowing her to complete her statement.
Please.
Thank you
If there's no
very much.
objection, then
If there are none, I would appreciate it.
so-
I worked a long time
All
on
right.
this.
I know you did. I know you did. So I hear no objection, so please continue.
I'll be as brief as possible. After talking with my neighbors and law enforcement, one person has hijacked a once beautiful, serene spot in our community. This historic neighborhood with restored homes, manicured lawns, and wonderful wild guineas that have made their home in our area for decades is now marred with feces and a roaming homeless person who camps out in the open, visible for all to see, near several for sale signs throughout surrounding blocks. So tell me, if you happen to be in the market for a home in this neighborhood, in this price range, would this be appealing to you? This person defecates and urinates in full view. Has not been caught by law enforcement in the act, but I do have it on video, and I would be happy to share. We pay higher property taxes in our area, a higher cost to maintain our homes and yards, along with municipal taxes and fees that ensure our safety and well-being. And I sympathize and understand the plight and suffering that goes with homelessness. But in this case, it is us, the taxpayers, who are in jeopardy of losing our way of life. So for example, if we choose not to address this issue, more homeless will migrate to our area. Since I wrote this report, 2 more have shown up, and fences are going up everywhere. Property values will decrease. People will flee the area for safer, more appealing neighborhoods or even towns. And the historic neighborhood we now enjoy will deteriorate and fade away inevitably. We are here today to find what options we are left with and what can be done to prevent this tragedy that affects everyone in this town, not just the people in historic Victoria. For once, we actually have hard data as to the outcome we will be experiencing if we continue to ignore this problem. Look to Austin and San Francisco. The city is not only overrun with homeless, but their tourist attractions are now mountains of garbage left behind by nomadic hordes of homeless and IV drug users, store owners hosing off sidewalks that have been used as toilets, and even apps on our phone to avoid areas of high feces content. Not only that, but cities like San Francisco are seeing a resurgence of medieval diseases such as smallpox, hepatitis C, typhoid, and antibiotic-resistant tuberculosis. In my opinion, this is quite terrifying, and I wonder where our health department is on this. The timeline and eventual destination is there for us to see. What can be done, what should be done, what must be done. To avert this disaster is to adopt and enact a city ordinance which enables our law enforcement to clear the streets, sidewalks, and ensure the safety of our private and personal property, health, and well-being. This prevents people roaming across our property at all hours of the night and banging on our doors, which happens frequently, terrifying our elderly neighbors and young alike. We have to face the reality of our city's financial resources when we contemplate housing and private property and other solutions. South Texas has a rich and vibrant history. Victoria and surrounding areas are landmarks and a testament to our great state. We have several historic neighborhoods, homes, landmarks, and southern charm that come with cities like ours that are scattered across Texas. In order to retain the beauty and charm for everyone to enjoy, we have to have rules and guidelines to preserve this. Otherwise, all these things that are unique to our town and many like it will disappear and only exist by word of mouth and nostalgia. To illustrate the timelessness and practical approach to this problem, I will defer to the wisdom of Benjamin Franklin, who said, I am for doing good to the poor, but I think the best way of doing good to the poor is not making them easy in their poverty, but leading or driving them out of it. I observed that the more public provisions were made for the poor, the less they provided for themselves. and became, of course, poorer. And to the contrary, the less that was done for them, the more they did for themselves and became richer. Now is the time when we have to be brutally practical. We have to face the realities of our current situation and our limitations, and need to adopt and enact as soon as possible an ordinance like the ones that were mentioned here. Our current situation of arrest and release is a drain on our police and our sheriff's department and goes nowhere. It causes morale to drop, taxpayer money to be wasted. And I know that an ordinance, while is not a perfect fix, is a place to begin. And that is what we need to do. These issues have been parsed and reparsed and researched ad nauseum. We need to do something. We can amend it, we can alter it, or we can choose to put it aside. But recourse for the taxpayers is imperative now. And I thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Edwards. Again, if you would give us your name and address for the record.
My name is Kim Pickens, and my address is 812 Blythe Road. I have been a homeless advocate for over 10 years. I have been in Victoria for over 7, and I have stood in front of this council for more than 6. I have brought issues, I have brought ideas, and we are still in the same spot. We do not, unfortunately, we do not have anywhere for overnight shelter at this point in Victoria. Until the Salvation Army opens back up for men, there's not been since Harvey, almost 2 years now, where a man could come and spend the night and get a meal and a shower and a safe bed. So for the past almost 2 years, people have been forced to live out on the street. Their criminal trespasses that have been issued have kept people from actually potentially going into a place to get something to drink, to find shelter from the heat. So the thing is, we have this idea that we have all these places and all these spaces for people to go when we don't. The thing is, Midcoast Family Services has a shelter that unfortunately is the majority of the time 110% full of domestic violence victims, where there is no room for people who are homeless, no homeless women, no homeless men. We have no place for homeless families to go. We have one safe parking space for people who are car homeless, and I administer that. The thing is, if you are homeless in this city encourages you to leave. They encourage you to be jailed. The thing is, there are no real solutions to being homeless in this place. We have programs that can help, but you have to do certain things to be able to qualify for those. If you have no phone, if you have no address, if you have no way to get there, you cannot, we are basically causing people to be unsuccessful. If I am on the north side and the resources downtown, the chance that I'm gonna walk 5 to 7 miles in 100-degree heat is 0. I don't have funds to get on a bus. I don't have a way to get anywhere. The thing is, these are everyday, all-day problems. I have spent time, and I appreciate Ms. Edwards and her passion. I appreciate the fact that, people are scared of homeless people. I have stood, I have sat, I have talked, I have hung out, I have slept overnight. I have invited people for years, when I was 4 years that I was president of the Homeless Coalition, invited people to come out and see what it was like to sleep out for one night. We got 0 people that came out. In the entire time that I was president of the Homeless Coalition, we had someone that we had asked from the city to be here. We invited the city, the mayor repeatedly. We had the mayor come out once. I've spoken with people who have told me they expect for churches and nonprofits to do this work. We can't do it all by ourselves. The city has to be involved in some way, shape, or form. I'm not saying that you have to be completely responsible, but there has to be some kind of partnership that works along. Midcoast doesn't have enough funds to deal with this problem. And for the most part, most of the churches are not interested in helping, and I hate to say that. They do a little bit of what they can, but they do stuff for their members. They don't do things. I have had people who have walked up church after church after church and said, you are the only church that opened its door and just let me in to go to the bathroom or get a cup of water. I'm telling you right now, you can say what you want, but I have literally experienced these things, talked to people, watched these things happen. Panhandling, most of the people who are panhandling, it is their very last resort. No one is making $500 to $700 a day. There are people who have gotten rocks thrown at them, pennies thrown out windows. I mean, people are trying to actually hurt our homeless people who are asking and begging and pleading for $5, for $1, something to go to get $1 to get food. I can appreciate the fact that nobody wants to see someone having a movement in the middle of any property. But we have to decide as a community, do we want to consider these people who live in this town as our citizens? Are they worthy of our help or are they not? The thing is, and if the eighth rule, whatever it was, the thing is, if we are not going to allow homeless people to be a part of the Constitution.
Can you wrap it up, please?
I'm wrapping it up right now with my last final point. The thing is, if we do not consider homeless people who are just minus a permanent place to live, that the Constitution doesn't apply to them, then basically we're not looking for a solution. We're looking to be punitive, and we're not looking to actually do something that can help uplift people. People are not, no one wakes up in the morning and says, hey, I want to be homeless. I don't care if they're drug addicted. I don't care if they're in domestic violence situations. The thing is, people are not trying to do that. It's a broken relationship. And we have to be, as a community, willing to work on that, period.
If I may,
Yes, sir.
you've exceeded your 5 minutes,
Okay.
and we appreciate your comments very much.
Well, you guys wanted to know about beds, so.
Good evening. I'm Dr. Sandra Strickland. I live at 501 North Craig Street. I am a public health nurse, have been for 55 years. I have lived in every one of these large cities and worked administratively as well as on a one-on-one basis with the homeless and those in need. I have worked in other states as well. And let me assure you, there is a need in Victoria. We talk about the number. Ms. Edwards gave you a number of those in our area, 200 and something. Let me assure you, it's double that. It's not 200 and something. We're just not able to register all of them. They are here. Many of them I have found from working in other cities that are parole violators from other states. They come here because of criminal acts that they have committed. The one situation in our area is the very same thing. She is violating parole. We are not enforcing that. No one is enforcing that in our city. Send her back where she needs to be. We cannot help people. We cannot enable these situations by bringing a bag of food every day to the individual or a bottle of water or whatever. We've got to have greater solutions to this. An ordinance, one that has substance to it, one that can be enforced. We've got to have one to continue having a safe city. Right now, our community is not safe. The individual that just spoke said they're not making $500 to $1,000 a day. Yes, they are. They are making that. They are standing out there. I'll give you an example. My daughter, when she was in college, wanted to work because she needed some extra cash. And she did. But on her way to the mall to work, she saw this poor, homeless individual, terribly dirty, terribly filthy. Well, she felt so sorry for him. She handed her French fries to him. He took them. Don't know what he did with them, but he took them. She went to work at the mall. 2 hours later, this very individual walks in, well-dressed, very well-groomed. Now, where did he get all the money all of a sudden? You see, they are making money by panhandling. We have scammers. We have situations with gypsies. Houston is overrun with gypsies right now. I have a son and daughter-in-law that live there. They're trying to deal with that situation. Folks, we've got problems. They're moving our way. We need a strong ordinance, one that will be enforced, one that will be backed by our council and, as well, our law enforcement. We have ordinances on the books right now that I'm finding no one enforces them. Why do we have them? So if we are going to consider an ordinance, if we're going to talk about that and work on that, let's do it. But let's find a way to enforce it and be diligent about that. The other thing you have to remember, out of the numbers that are considered mentally ill, 65% of the homeless in the statistics that we have, and I will quit, 65% are mentally ill. We've got to do something about that as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name's Myra Starkey, and I reside at 404 West Guadalupe, and I'm blowing up Andrew's phone as well. We've just purchased a lot downtown at 501 Commercial, and a woman named Maricela, I believe Martinez, is living there. She is living at times on our lot, and other times she is on T. Michael's lot. Now, when I say that, I mean she is on the edge of the sidewalk, between the sidewalk and the street, because she has been told by law enforcement that if she lives there, she can't be arrested. If she is living on a lot that I mow and I keep because it's my lot, the city has it's the city easement, but that is considered our property. It's the city. I'm mowing it and I'm keeping it, but that's where Maricelda lives. Now, I am an enabler, as she mentioned. I refuse to see her suffer. I've taken her shoes when I saw that she had no shoes. She said, I don't want your shoes. I've offered her a job. She says, I don't want a job. I give her water almost daily because I'm afraid she's going to die there. I've called the police, probably so much that they say, hello, Mrs. Starkey. One day she was not moving and I couldn't get her to move, and so I called the police because I thought she might be dead. I fed her on occasion when she stopped me walking and said, I'm hungry. But this is the problem. It's not just about Maricelda. It's about everyone who has no place. She has no place to go to the bathroom, so she goes to the bathroom on our lot. She goes to the bathroom in the street. She goes to the bathroom, and when we call, the police says, you have to take a picture. You have to catch her. I don't have the ability to stand there and take a picture of her. That's no dignity. I'm sad for Maricelda. Several of us feed her at different times of the day because when she asks me and I'm walking, she says I'm hungry, I go get her something. I know the Coles, Jim and Donna, have assisted her with water as well and food. But the thing is I am proud of a place that doesn't want to see people suffer. But also we have to think of our neighborhoods. And Mariselda does have a record. She has a criminal record. Kathleen didn't go into it, but there's a criminal record. She's banged on neighbors' doors, and our elderly in our neighborhood are terrified of her. She has several criminal trespass. She has not been arrested. We've been told that she can't be arrested because there's no place to put her, that because of her mental illness, she can't be put in jail. I'm not sure what to do about somebody who doesn't want any help. I mean, she doesn't want to move. I've offered her clothes. I've offered her everything. Taylor's constantly after me to leave, not help her. But not because but he believes what the police said, you're just enabling her. She is not moving, despite all of our efforts to get her help. I've sent Mid-Coast, Gulf Bend. I've called different healthcare professionals who know how to deal with this thing. She's not going anywhere. She has no desire. At the time when Mid-Coast came, they had 92 apartments in town, and they had 2 available, one of which they would be willing to give to her. She doesn't want to go there. She didn't want to get in my car to take a shower, to have me take her someplace, because Mid-Coast also provides showers for the homeless. In other words, there is a population out there who doesn't want help. They want to just stay where they want to stay. And that's why we have to have an ordinance. It's not right for her to be on the side of a street, not having a place to go to the bathroom. And I understand from the police that if I provide her a place to go to the bathroom and she continues to use it and I say no, now I have to file an eviction so that she's not on my property. It's a problem. This is all a problem. I'm sorry y'all have to fix it. I'm really sorry, but y'all ran for city council. But it is a difficult problem. And I think we don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are lots of communities that have these people. If Mariselda wanted help, there is at least 10 to 15 of us per day, according to Mariselda, who comes and offers her something. And she wants us all to go away. Don't tell Taylor about that gavel thing. I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
My name is Joe Del Rosa, and thank you, Council, for the time. I live at 407 North Victoria. I have this individual across the street. I've talked to that individual. We've had a conversation. I've fed him, given him water. My wife and I have done what we can, but this individual does not want help. Talked to the individual very calmly, very content in how they are living. They wrap around in a blanket, and the South Texas summer heat is sweltering. And they're comfortable. I don't see how they can be comfortable in this heat, laying on the concrete on the sidewalk that people used to walk back and forth. I don't see the neighbors anymore. They go on the other side of us. And this lady needs help, but she doesn't want it. Try to talk to her, have helped her, have fed her, to no avail. Other people I know have done the same thing, offered to buy her shoes, whatever she needs, but she refuses it. And we need something that helps all. We need something that's equitable. I don't know what the answer is. If I did, I'd give it to you. But going on 2 months, same spot, talked to her on numerous occasions. I don't have the answer. I wish I did. But that individual, I hate to say it, is content exactly what they're doing. How do you deal with that? They can't be mentally right because South Texas, you're wrapped in a blanket all day in the heat. I could maybe understand at night when it's a little damp. It rains. They're drenched. Don't even try to cover up with a piece of plastic, anything, even offered. They don't want it. And they're drenched. So I thank you for your time. I appreciate it. And I'm willing to help anybody at any time, and I've done it. and I'll continue to do it. I've given food to guys at different corners and stuff, and they're all will say, thank you very much, giving them money. I've got an individual here that wants no help. And I don't want to wake up one morning and find out that individual has passed on because we did not enough for her. So anyway, thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
Hi, I'm Kim Calk. I live at 417 Church Street. And I just wanted to, not all of the homeless are the same. You can't group them all in one category. They didn't all get on the street at the same time or in the same way. They're not all drug addicts. They're not all criminals. I was displaced during Hurricane Harvey. So that was my first problem. Then 6 months after that, I had a stroke and I had no insurance. I had a nice job, but it didn't provide insurance. And I couldn't afford insurance because rent was too high and I couldn't afford to live. So I ended up homeless myself. I went to Perpetual Help Home and got back on my feet, and I have my own place now. But you don't have to be an addict. You don't have to be a bad person to be homeless. I hear people coming with complaints, but I don't hear anybody saying, this is the solution. Well, I can tell you the biggest solution and the long-term solution for all of this is affordable housing. That is something Victoria does not have. The median income, for our median income is it's misleading, because there is a portion of the city that's making more than the median, way more than the median. And that's what's bringing those that are not making anywhere near the median hurt, because there is such a huge population of doctors, lawyers, plant workers. You know, we've got a lot of really good economy here with our high-paying jobs. But there's a whole bunch of people that don't come near that. And a $900 apartment is unaffordable on a minimum wage job. It just doesn't work. And the people, I know a lot of people say, well, get an education or get a job. That's just not something everybody can do. Not everybody can go to college, not because of money, but because they can't learn from books. They learn by doing. There's a lot of situations that put people into homelessness, and it has nothing to do with bad character. Nothing to do with drug addictions. Those that are mentally ill, there is a solution for that. And the Be Well Victoria Coalition, if you want to help those that are mentally ill and help them get a better life and help them take control of their disease, come to a Be Well Victoria Coalition meeting. There's one at the library next Tuesday at 5 o'clock. Get involved, do something. Don't just complain. If you can't be part of the solution, don't be part of the problem. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name's Melissa Lyman. I live at 707 North Victoria, about 3 blocks from where this woman lives, and a block away from another camping situation that has not been able to be solved by anyone, and I'll get to that right at the end. First of all, I just want to say that not everybody is mentally ill, but many, many are. And it comes from our state hospitals, our Texas government, our taxpayers not wanting to put out the money for those situations. I understand, we live here, and that's everyone's right. But now we're paying the price. We have what is always claimed to be the wonderful Gulf Bend Center. And I'm not going to bash them at all, but we've now allocated, they have $200,000 to mental health deputies for follow-up, for, I'm not sure what they do. They drive people to the hospital in Corpus. But I think a big missing piece in this homeless situation is Gulf Bend. My husband, and I will say this, I am speaking for myself because my husband worked at Gulf Bend he was the physician in charge for 14, 15 years when we first moved here. And it was run by just some amazing men, very well respected, everything's done well. I hear people every day that can't get services there. And I don't expect the homeless to go there and look for services. What I expect is for the services that we do have to get involved. And we have to all get involved. I'm guilty as anyone about this. And so I can't complain because I've done nothing at this point. But, you know, I do think we're going to have to face putting these people somewhere. Putting them on a bus to another county is not the answer. We're not Houston. We're not Sugar Land. We need to be able to enforce that ordinance in maybe the same language, but we're going to have to do it at a small scale. And I encourage you, hopefully, to do that. In the meantime, you know, it's very expensive because not only do you open a shelter, someone has to man it. You can't let it be a drug haven. You can't let it be a place for a physical, sexual abuse. If you put people in the same position without any accountability, unfortunately, it happens. There are bad people in the world, and they're not all homeless. There are many of us citizens. I don't want to say I'm a bad person because I'm not, because I try not to be. But we have to treat people with compassion, and please don't forget that. On the same note as camping, I am another person that probably has my name known down at the city non-emergency police number for complaining about an RV that has been on my corner for months. I don't even know how many long now. And all I hear is we don't have an ordinance from the police, or he knows the rules and he only has to move 2 inches every 2 days. That camper has been in the same spot now for the last 2 weeks. He has moved it on occasion. It blocks the intersection. I almost got run over by the city trash truck. Okay, that's terrifying. You can't see, you can't ease out on there until you're already far into the street. I'm a block off of Vine Street, very busy street. And nothing can be done about that. So please don't forget RV campers in our city because they're being utilized. Nothing's being done. You would think the police department would go by there every day with their little measuring stick and maybe he'd get tired of it, but they don't. And we are fortunate to have a neighbor who is working with this gentleman that hasn't been successful. We've tried everything. And I encourage you to please look at those situations as well. And everybody's going to have an area in their city to take care of these people. It doesn't have to be out in the country. It doesn't have to be on the south side. But it's going to have to be close where everybody has availability to do it. We're not above anyone else having this situation in our neighborhood. We just want it watched. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
How are y'all? My name's Dennis Albright. I live at 408 Wood Chase, and I'm the current president of the Woodway Homeowners Association. I'm assuming that anybody can get up and talk. I don't have anything to say about homeless other than it sounds like y'all got something that y'all need to deal with. I'll be short and sweet. Basically, I'm here on behalf of the neighborhood, and some of the other board members are here, as well as some residents. Basically, we'll go back to the meeting y'all had in June 18, where y'all discussed capital improvement projects. And basically, I'm here just to say, we saw in there that we want to move our streets back to 2023. And then I think there was a slide during that presentation that actually talked about eliminating all 3 phases of those street repairs to begin with. I can tell you right now, I don't know how many of our residents are here, but that's not something that's going to sit well with us. Our streets were actually in pretty good shape until we had them rehabbed. I think y'all actually even admitted on the videotape that y'all made a mistake. Y'all made an error. and it's y'all's fault. So basically, we want you to fix it. You told us that you were going to fix it starting in 2020, and now we're getting pushed back and possibly pushed back indefinitely. You know, it's just like if you were in business and you built a house and 6 months later it started to fall apart and you said, oh, wait, I got other houses I got to go build. So we'll get to you when we get to you. You know, you mentioned that we were going to get it done in 2020. That's what we're here to say. So I'm not going to, everybody, y'all know what's going on. So I'm not going to say, I know there's other issues. There's other people that have problems with their streets and so on and so forth. But those problems weren't created by errors done. And, you know, if we wouldn't have messed with the streets to begin with, we wouldn't be here complaining that we need our streets fixed. They were actually worse 6 months after it was done. It was worse than before it was even done. So anyway, I don't know if there's anybody else that wants to talk on the issue or not, but I don't want to take up any more of your time. Y'all know why I'm here, and you know there's a problem, and I'm just wanting you to, you know, do due diligence and take care of it and fix it for us. And that's all I have to say. Thanks.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that wants to speak?
I'd like to say a brief word. My name is Clint Wilson. I'm a current homeowner as of this year, but one of the things I'd like to interject is part of my decision when I bought was I moved as far away out of town as I could. Part of the reason. Also, the one thing I haven't heard mentioned is you have to have both sides of the coin, where you have to have the personal neighborhoods and the small satellite communities, and you got to have the compassion. But I think it's more like an algebraic equation, where we're concentrating on A, we're missing X, and we're focusing on the equal. You can't get to one without the other. So I think it's a basic, simple solution of you have to have an ordinance, A. Then the police can do their job. And what that helps the homeless is we can weed out the criminals from the people that really need help. We have to filter this out. And the panhandlers indeed, because we have people coming in from other cities and the people bringing them in from other cities. And what that's doing, it's taking resources away from the people that are here. So that was, I'll be brief, but that was it.
Thank you very much. Anyone else?
Hi, I'm Taylor Starkey. I live at 404 West Guadalupe. Appreciate y'all all doing this. I did it for 7 years, and it was some of, honestly, the most joyous years of my life. The city staff is so professional and still are, and I really miss it, being off the city council, but I would not want to go back to it. I've hiked the Grand Canyon once and don't want to do that again either. I was much younger in both situations. One thing I would like to say is the city staff, I feel like, is always open. Mr. Gush, if that's how you pronounce your difficult last name, was so kind to talk to me. And it really spent the time to explain to me a lot of what this issue involves. And, you know, we have a really intelligent city council and lots of professionals on there, and y'all have good heads. I think if, I know y'all can come to solutions, and Maricelda's not intoxicated. Yes, her head is on my property often that I'm creating over there, and I do find it problematic. I've considered a right-of-way always as a place that is a part of your property that is a quasi-private, quasi-public, but that people can certainly go along the sidewalk, they can walk across the right-of-way, but apparently it's sort of a no man's land that can be, a person can become a permanent resident of. If there is a law that prohibits someone from camping or building up big, large amounts of trash on the property, it's not being enforced. And so, and the person who's actually the property, T. Michael, who owns the property that the rest of her body is owned, probably does not feel like he's politically able to say anything, and she knows that. We are not neglecting Mariselda. We respect her as an individual, but she is not respecting our private property rights. She's not respecting our neighborhood. Our daughter's a surgeon. Myra and I, daughter is a surgeon. She just moved back to town and she lives a half block from there. And in her walks around the neighborhood, she moved here from Houston a few weeks back. And in one of her walks, she walked by Mariselda to say, how are you doing or whatever. And she said to my daughter, no matter what you tell me to do, I'm going to do the opposite. So, you know, it's a problem. And I would ask that if it could be addressed in the ordinance that the public right-of-way in front of someone's property, adjacent to someone's property, is not the same as a park. It does need to have some consideration of the landowner, that a person cannot just come lay down in Woodway Country Club or Old Victoria or Castle Hills or any other neighborhood, cannot just take up residence on your 3 or 4 feet of right-of-way in front of your property. There's bound to be some city law that already exists. It can be something that can be done to have a person off of your property. I appreciate Jesus's, Mr. Garza's solution in Kingsville. As I know there's a large population of rattlesnakes, so you didn't have a lot of public camping there. 3, maybe 2, and maybe none at this point. But anyway, y'all are doing a great job. You've got a great city staff. There can be a solution. I know it's not to put them all on a bus to El Paso. That's not going to work like they used to joke about back when I was on city council. But I don't think they actually did that. But anyway, thank you all for all your work. And if you can do something between now and when this ordinance all is passed about our problem that really is disturbing to a lot of the people in our neighborhood, we would definitely appreciate if something could be done. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Virginia Powell, and I reside at 406 Woodchase Drive here in Victoria. I spoke with Mr. Gill shortly after the Woodway streets were rehabbed this last time about our streets that were coming apart shortly after they were rehabbed. He explained to me that he, along with the state engineer, had decided upon this new way to rehab the streets that would be less costly to the city. I reminded him that, okay, now our streets are coming apart, and folks that live in the rounding part of the street, their streets are just totally, you lose your car in it. They were horrible. The trash truck comes around and, messes up the other edge of the street, and we're just left in this mess. And I asked him what he thought about it, and he said, well, it was really kind of my decision, and yeah, we found out that it's not going to work. So I asked what the alternative was, and he said there was none, that the money that was spent there is gone, and that there is no more, and that we would have to wait for a year or 2 to have our streets fixed properly. So it's been longer than that. We did have the big holes fixed, which was huge, but we're still left with, I can't see us going on until 2023 in the condition that we're in. We have a lot of homes that are for sale in Woodway that we would like to see kept in the nice condition that they're in. And if we can't have a nice place for these people to drive on, our houses aren't going to sell, and our property values are going to go down. So I'd just like to ask you guys to kind of think about that again, about that date, and see if we could get us moved back up. Also, on the homeless situation, it's so sad to see behind Lowe's, the homeless folks that live there during the winter have gone off and left their Target, baskets, their Home Depot baskets, and all of their trash left there for everybody to see whenever they leave Walmart. I don't know what that, I don't know what the answer is there. I don't want to go pick up the trash. And it, causes a stress on our city people to have to spend time and money on picking that up, but got a big job. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Michael Reyes. I'm at 122 Creekside Drive in Woodway. I won't take up too much of you all's time. I just want to echo a little bit of what my neighbors are saying. But, we've been at this about the streets in Woodway for, since April, that I recall anyway, April of 2015. And the only thing that's changed is, we've got the second city manager since then. We've got all new board council members. We've got the third mayor now, and we still haven't gotten our streets repaired. And, I think if you all have any goals, you should try to just, while you're one group of people before another election, put your heads together and see if we can't get this fixed. Our board, I've been on the board for 6 years. We represent over 250 plus residents in Woodway. And it's always the same thing. We can talk about everything that goes on in this city, but the streets are just horrible. And I'm not sure how we ever got away from, moving us. Jeff, thank you so much for taking my calls over and over and over again. We really appreciate it. But we just don't know what to do anymore. I mean, our taxes keep going up. Our streets are in disrepair, and they just keep going down. The values of our properties, they just don't line up with what we're paying in taxes, and if we're customers of this city and we pay in, then we should be getting something back for it. And I just don't feel like we are. So thank you all. I know it's a hard job. It's a thankless job, but it's got to be done. It's got to be fixed. And I did hear that, I asked if we could float some bonds, if there's something else we could do, and they said, well, we've got a credit rating and we have to keep that. When it was time to send our kids to college and they got into a better college than we planned for, you have to go do what you have to do. So if you guys have to go down from AAA to AA to get us our streets, please think about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other public comments? Seeing none, Ms. Solis, did you want to speak now after you've heard?
The only thing is that, you said the two options was beds or places. I would go with places at this point. Because with the beds, we would still have to talk to whoever might be wanting to come in and help us. But like Kim said, we don't have a place for a family. We don't have a place for women. The Mid-Coast is always full, so yeah, we've got a problem. But for right now, because we want to do everything and I don't, talking about the lady that's Marisol, she knows she knows that she is in the wrong. So even if she had a mental problem, how does she know that she's in the right? I mean, that she can, somebody's either feeding her that knowledge or she's not really as ignorant as she may come across. That's what I'm thinking. I don't know. But, in the ordinance, we do have to address, like Dr. Starkey said, the right-of-way.
Well,
because that comes into play, because if we don't cover the right-of-way and, the private property, we're just kind of like not covering the whole thing, I think. That might be one of the things that we need to cover.
Are these ordinances pretty indicative of the length of what they actually become? When I'm looking at these?
I have not looked at the total list of, the total collection of them here. I would say the one on the front page that I'm looking at, the city of Sugar Land, is very short.
Right.
I think we're talking about depending on what council chooses to adopt, something on the order of 2 or 3 pages. It doesn't have to be excessively
Yeah,
complicated.
I don't think it's that complicated. I think, and again, I think for direction from this body, I think we move forward with an ordinance. I think that question of what the alternative is can be a place or it can be beds. But I would sure like to engage people in conversation that know more about that subject than we do right now while staff is working on that ordinance. Another thing I hear is I think we ought to look at enforcement of some of our ordinances with the defecation and urination and things like that. We could kind of double down on a little of that in the interim until we get this problem solved. And I think everybody that's come here tonight, it is our job, it is the city council's job to deal with this problem. But again, I just want to make sure that we put as much thought into it as we can and try to get it right. But I have no problem with moving forward.
That's why I brought it up.
Okay, thank you, thank you. And it is a problem, it is a problem. All right, if there's no other comments under citizens' comment, then we'll move into item C, items for public
Pardon me,
hearings.
Mr. Mayor. I mean, can we have some kind of time frame that we can come back with something? I mean, I know that Mr. Bachnight had mentioned something, but for the public, I don't want to say that we're going to talk about something and just have an open-ended period of time.
That's right. We have 3 weeks until the next city council meeting because this is a 5 Tuesday month. I would think that I can be prepared to have a discussion about concepts in 3 weeks at our next council meeting. I know that there's a sense of urgency. I'm hearing that from council members. But at the same time, I think we need to narrow down that focus. You all took my advice about giving broad policy goals, and I think I want to go back and watch carefully the videotape and count noses about who's in favor of what kind of concepts and try to bring back some concepts that council could consider to narrow the focus. What I'm hearing so far is a preference to address it more quickly with a places type ordinance. And in order to enact something like that, we're going to need some further direction about which places. So I can bring back some ideas to narrow the scope.
And in that same timeframe, myself and staff could be part of that conversation so that with these concepts, there's also some options on what that potentially could look like.
That's right.
So I'm gonna be clear about what my concept is and my idea of it. It looks like Sugarlands or Laredo's. It's as simple as that. Not places, beds, addressed in the ordinance. I don't see it done in these other ones. And mine is, let's get something on the books, let's work with our partners to come up with something to do places or beds. But I don't see it addressed in these ordinances. I like these, they're succinct, easy,
I concur.
not much ambiguity.
I continue to fund, be partners with our community partners that we do with CDBG funds. I don't want to take funds away from Mid-Coast to all of a sudden fund a homeless park when they don't receive those funds. I would hate to strip funds away from the other entities.
Well, and if I may kind of throw in a plug too, one of the sort of overarching efforts that's right around the corner is the census count, right? And how this is all connected is that we know that we are missing out on additional CDBG funds because of potentially not having accurate counts. And so in the future, one of the things that we want to make sure we push for is for residents to be educated and helping us push for participation in the census, because that potentially could lead to having more dollars through the CDBG process so that we can have the option of funding more agencies without having to sacrifice, cutting funding from existing ones, as an example. Obviously, that's not a solution for tomorrow, but just want to throw that out there because this is a perfect example as to the benefit of having more CDBG designated areas so we have more money to address more issues like these.
So,
Just for the
so again,
record,
my
I concur.
expectation is that I'm not here to talk next time in 3 weeks about concepts for an ordinance. I want an ordinance in front of me that we can amend as required by the group up here and we move forward with it. 3 weeks is a good amount of time.
I concur with Dr. Young
Well,
and
how does it
Ms.
work?
Balknight.
On committing somebody that has a mental illness in the state of Texas?
You're asking a question beyond my area of expertise. All right, the state of Texas has very limited involuntary commitment ability. Essentially, the person has to be a threat to themselves or others. And so if they are not saying out loud that they are suicidal or homicidal, then it's very difficult to involuntarily commit someone in the state of Texas. And that's about the extent of my expertise in that area. If you're interested in a further presentation, there are people in the community who are experts that we could get to give you a presentation.
I've worked 4 years with the Gulf Bend Collaborative on mental health issues, and they're very complex, trust me.
Right.
We've gone to the legislature twice. We were able to get $1.3 million for this community once, and we got funded again. But it takes time and it takes a lot of effort. And these problems seemingly are simple, but they're not. And they take due diligence and careful thought to do them properly. So I understand the urgency, but I don't want us to slip in our due diligence by being overly urgent. And now that's not to say we have a problem, we need to address it, but we need to move forward and see what staff brings back to us in 3 weeks.
I disagree. I don't think that we need to be waiting for 3 weeks to come back to discuss options again and concepts. I think we need to come back here with an ordinance in hand. Let's get something in place. 3 weeks.
Well, Mr. Balknight, you're just saying, bring me back the ordinance that you read in Sugar Land with no further input.
No, I say we can mount it up here.
Maybe that's what's brought back, perhaps. I think what my intent and direction was is bring back an ordinance.
Well, that
for
would be
discussion.
great, but I keep hearing that bring back concepts to discuss, to draft an ordinance, and that's not what I want.
Well, I think we can bring back what they're prepared to bring back at that time, but we need to do our due diligence and look at, because you have 2 cities that you've looked at these ordinances. There are many more cities out there too. He listed in his presentation the several. So bring
Mr. McCoy.
back at that time what staff believes is the best ordinance for our community.
I greatly disrespect. This is Victoria. I'm not worried about any
I know.
other city. We are
I know.
Victoria. We are unto ourselves. We represent Victoria. We don't represent San Antonio or Austin or
I'm
Dallas.
not saying we do.
I want to be very clear that we're Victoria. We represent Victorians.
But all of our ordinances and everything we do fall under laws above us. So we need to be careful in adopting the solutions. And again, I think we need to do our due diligence in going to our partners in the community and educating ourselves more about what's available out there. This out of sight, out of mind deal is not, I don't think it's what our community really wants. I know we have a lot of passionate people here tonight with a specific problem, but we've got to look for a long-term solution that will live beyond just this singular problem that we have right now.
This ordinance here doesn't say that there's not a long-term solution there. This ordinance is with a place to put people isn't a long-term solution either. That doesn't cure homelessness.
So what you're saying is you want staff to bring us back the places to put them? If you're looking for an ordinance.
If I can just recap what I'm hearing. So I very clearly heard Councilman Balknight, Councilman De La Garza, Councilman Young specifically request to bring back an ordinance that is similar to Laredo and Sugar Land that completely ban public camping. But I'm also hearing the side that says, bring back an ordinance for discussion, which could be the one that these council members are requesting, but also let's have a conversation with our partners to find a more long-term solution, is what I'm kind of gathering.
And I don't see that as part of the ordinance.
I'm not saying it should be.
Yeah.
I'm just saying there's nothing that says that we can't reach out to our partners, engage with them as we still do these things that you're wanting us to do.
Absolutely.
They're not mutually exclusive.
No.
Right, I don't think we're done with the conversation, but on our next agenda, I agree with Councilman Bachnight and De La Garza and Councilman Young. I would like an ordinance similar to this, but I'd like it on the agenda as an action item, not as a discussion, as an action item for first reading.
I think that I'm hearing very clearly, and I want to restate probably what Mr. Garza just said.
Recap the recap?
I'm going to recap the recap,
And then we'll
just to make sure
continue
that everybody
discussion.
knows that I'm on the same page you're on.
I might recap after that.
I think you should. Can we have overtime? No. I will bring back next meeting an ordinance modeled after the ordinances that we're seeing in Laredo and Sugar Land. I think there is a consensus on council to consider taking action on an ordinance like that. However, I have to say, it is my professional obligation to advise you at that time that that ordinance would not likely withstand judicial scrutiny were we to be challenged on it. And so I understand you're giving me direction about what you want to see brought to council, and I will do that. But I also have an obligation under the charter, and so we will continue, I think, to have this discussion in 3 weeks.
Okay.
That's why
Thank
I'm
you.
saying we're not done with the discussion, but, yeah, I understand.
Well, the discussion can happen about the ordinance.
And at future meetings as well.
Right.
It's a bigger issue than a single ordinance, but we have an issue that we can resolve.
Any further discussion? If not, then I'll close citizen communication. Discussion will move into items with public hearings.
I know it's not typical to announce the time, but it is 10 minutes after 7 o'clock. Council members, thank you for a extended, spirited conversation. The first item under items with public hearings is a public hearing. There is no action required tonight, although I believe Mr. Kaminsky wants to give a presentation and some explanation. This is item C1, a public hearing to accept public comment on the City of Victoria's Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery Application to the Texas General Land Office for the Local Infrastructure Program in the amount of $6,056,772.
Okay, now do I need to open the public hearing for Mr.
Why don't we let Mr.
Kaminsky?
Kaminsky do his presentation first, and then
Okay.
we can allow the public to speak.
Thank you, Mayor. Council, about a month ago, at your June 18th meeting, you authorized the submittal of this grant application. In order to submit the grant, we had to do a 30-year public comment period. That's one of the requirements of the GLO before we submit the application to them. That comment period started on June 18th. It will conclude tomorrow, July 17th. For purposes of this public hearing, I just want to take one more opportunity to very briefly describe the infrastructure program guidelines and our proposed projects. The guidelines at a very high level are that infrastructure projects must have a documented tie back to Hurricane Harvey. You have to be able to connect. There's a nexus, some kind of connection to Harvey, and you have to be able to prove it. Secondly, at least 70% of the funding must benefit low to moderate income areas. We've chosen to dedicate this funding, a little over $6 million, to a series of drainage projects that are or will be designed to significantly improve storm drainage and reduce flooding in the areas just immediately southwest and south of downtown along the Guadalupe River. They include the floodgate replacement project, which is the installation of replacement of up to 5 existing floodgates along the river in the area that I just described, and the stormwater pump stations project, which is the installation of permanent pumping facilities to pump stormwater back over the levee and into the river during local rain events that occur when the river is at a stage where those floodgates are closed. There will also be, I believe, some related potential drainage improvements within the vicinity of the floodgates and the pumping stations, obviously, to make those work properly. Our deadline to submit this grant application is the end of August 30th. The GLO is processing these first submitted, first reviewed, and therefore it is our intent to submit as soon as possible. Our public comment period ends tomorrow. We will let GrantWorks know after the end of that public comment period whether there have been any public comments, and if there were, what they are. There have been none to date. and finalize any details that are remaining. There should be very few to get this thing submitted to the GLO. I can tell you that our buyout application, this is not related to this public hearing, but our buyout application has already been submitted to the GLO. We'll have a 30-day comment period on that process later on down the road. But if there are any questions about this infrastructure program, I'll be happy to answer now.
I just have one, John.
Sure.
Sometimes when you're dealing with the federal government, they require a study before you do something. Are they going to require us to do a study of any sort?
There will be a series of studies. There will be engineering studies. There will probably end up having to be some historical and archaeological reviews when we go through the environmental stage of, there will be an environmental process that's required before spending federal dollars or even getting them. So there are a series of those types of things that will happen. Once we know our projects are good, GLO is ready for us to move forward, then we'll actually get to the nitty-gritty of designing these things and actually doing the real details.
And those studies will be reimbursed with this money too?
Completely. The entire program is funded by HUD. There is no local match requirement.
Any further questions? Hearing none, I will open a public hearing on item C1. Anyone wanting to speak to this matter, please step forward. Seeing no one, I will close the public hearing.
Item C2 is an ordinance providing for the extension of certain boundary limits of the city of Victoria, Texas, and the annexation of certain territory consisting of approximately 3.19 acres of land at the request of DGNP Incorporated, adopting a service plan for the territory to be annexed, repealing all conflicting ordinances, providing for publication and savings, and declaring an effective date.
And I open a public hearing on item C2. Seeing no one, I'll close the public hearing.
I move we adopt or C2?
Second.
It has been moved and seconded for the adoption of item C2. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed?
Item C3 is an ordinance amending Chapter 1 of the Victoria City Code to authorize non-substantive corrections to code provisions or non-codified ordinances, resolutions, or other records, repealing all conflicting ordinances, providing for codification and savings, and declaring an effective date.
I will now open a public hearing on item C3. Anyone to speak to this matter, please step forward. Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing.
Make a motion to amend or to approve item C3.
Second.
Had me worried for a second there.
Yeah, me too, because I didn't know what I was going to say.
We have a motion. Did I hear a second? Motion and seconded. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed?
Mayor and council, there are 13 items on the consent agenda tonight. And
you want Allison to come up?
Do you have to read all of them?
Before I read them all out loud, I was asked a few weeks ago whether I need to read them all out loud, and I actually had to research the question. The answer is no, I don't have to read them. I have to read the ordinances out loud by caption, but I don't have to read the consent agenda or the other resolutions. And so I will entertain a request to not read them out loud.
Can I move that you have a pinch hitter?
Allison's here.
She's raising her hand in the back of the room, but I don't think I want to do that to her. I don't have to read the consent agenda out loud. We can approve it just by a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented, if you would like.
I recommend that.
All right, I take that as a motion to approve as.
Motion.
I trust we have all read the consent agenda.
Yeah. So we have a motion and a second to approve as presented.
It's,
moved.
It was
seconded
already.
here.
Yeah, it was already seconded.
Moved and seconded.
Ricky seconded.
Okay.
There we go.
I think it's been tripled and fourth too. So, but, so I would move to, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
I know
Move
that Allison
on.
is disappointed I got out of reading that. Item E1 is a resolution confirming the city's program for hot funds for outside agencies, appointing one former member from the hotel and convention industry, and reappointing 5 current members to the Hotel Occupancy Tax Fund Committee, and declaring an effective date. Mayor and council, Mr. Reyna will have a brief presentation about the hot funds and the status of the account and the history, and then I have a brief presentation about the program itself before you consider adoption.
Thank you, Thomas. Mayor, council, good evening.
He's going to distribute.
He's going to pass out a document, which I'm going to touch very lightly on. I'm not planning to talk, I'm not going to numbers very deep, nothing like that, because you well know, I know it's past 7 o'clock. Second is that we're going to have plenty of time in August to dive into the budget itself. So I'm just going to address some of the highlights, but please, any questions, I'll be happy to stay here and talk all you want. Thank you, officer. Couple of things. There's 3 columns there. You got a 2018, which is the actual, and then I got a 2019 projected, what I plan to end up this year in the middle. And the far right, you got a column, 2020 fiscal year. That's where it's being proposed currently. Let me quickly talk about some of these bullet points I have here. In 2018, that number 1, back then you allocated $100,000 to the outside agency. As you well know, we only paid out about $81,000. Of course, there was 3 entities that didn't get the full allocation because at the time of the program is ended, they got to submit their post-form program, and that's how they get paid. That bullet number 2, basically, I just want to give you a heads up. That was a carryover capital expenditure for the scoreboard of the youth sports complex. You're wondering, what's that? For 19, council allocated $125,000. Right now, assuming 100% to be paid out, but that's what you allocated for 2019. On that number 4 bullet, it's just more FY is that every year we allocate $300,000 transfer to the community operating fund. This year, we're going to bypass and hold off for 1 year due to the fact that we're proposing to do some Riverside Stadium improvements, which is number 5, $420,000. And it's listed there. Kobe's here if you want to talk about it.
I do want to just elaborate on that briefly, just for clarification purposes. So you didn't hear about these Riverside Stadium improvements when Parks presented their budget, partially because we were reserving these funds as a backup in case we didn't feel confident that we would be receiving money for the generator at the community center. And if you may recall, at the last meeting, John provided an update that we received very positive news associated with that generator being a high priority item. And so since that time, we felt comfortable and feel comfortable releasing, if you will, the funds that we had thought we would set aside as a backup in case we didn't get that grant. And so then that's why now we're proposing the improvements to Riverside Stadium. And obviously those qualify for hotel occupancy tax because of its purpose, and I'm sure I don't have to go into detail with that. But anyway, but that's the reason why you didn't hear about it when Kobe presented his budget the last time.
Thank you, Mr. Garza.
I'm pleased to see the parking lot. It's kind of embarrassing, and we have street standards, and I know it's a parking lot, but it's in terrible shape.
Yes, ma'am. It's bad. And the highlighted yellow box, there's why we're here tonight. Staff needs direction from council as to what amount should we put in there for the 2020 allocation for the outside agency. So again, you don't have to vote, just a proposal, put a number. You always can come back down the road in August, but I need a number to start with. It doesn't have to be a specific agency, just a number overall which council is comfortable with, like always.
I have a question about hotel motel money. According to one thing I read, one out of every $7 has to go to advertising.
It's a percentage.
It's a percentage.
Yeah, it's 14.
So is it a percentage on?
14 point something, and we
Is
cover
it a
that.
percentage on the total fund balance?
Tax rates, tax receipts.
On
Collected
tax receipts?
Each year.
Right.
And then there's another gauge on, I believe, the art side of it.
Okay.
It's
Yeah,
limited.
arts is capped at 15% and historic preservation is capped at 15%.
Okay, did I answer? Mr.
Yes.
Lawson? Okay.
I have a question.
Yes,
How are we
sir.
doing on our savings account for the hot funds?
Savings account.
So that
Fund
we
balance,
can,
you mean?
Yeah.
so that
I
we
know,
will be
I know,
able
I'm just
to
kidding. As you can tell,
guarantee funding.
well, back in 2018, you can tell right there on the handout, we had a policy of 80-20 allocation. So we're going from like, for example, in 2018, city's 785, the outside allocation 190 reserves. If you go to the 2020 year, I'm projecting the city be about 1.5, and the allocation from outside reserve 380,000. So to answer your question, it has increased. It's slowly going up to the point where we talked about, I think 3 or 5 years ago, when we get to a point where we don't get to that situation where hotel receipts collapse, we still can dip into the reserve for the outside. As for other members, in the past, the contract were formed where the payout was based on the actual receipt collected. That's all. So there was not a guarantee for the outside agencies to receive 100%. In this format, which was passed about 5 years ago, they have an outlet where we can make them whole, but still it needs council approval.
Okay, Gilbert, the $380,344, out of that, we wanted to keep 15% in our undesignated fund balance?
No, we're good.
Is that what we're using to use for the outside agencies program?
Well, what's going to happen? You see that $1.9 million
Uh-huh,
overall?
yes.
Whatever number you decide, those reserve funds will be reduced by 80% for the city and 20% from the outside agency, because based on the policy, it was an overall, whatever is left over, we allocated 80-20.
So
Okay.
if you, as an example, if you decide to allocate $100,000 for this program, 20,000 would come from the undesignated fund balance, so that'd go down to 360.
And the other,
And the 1.5, or not point, yeah, 1.5 would go down by 80.
Okay, I understand now. I was just trying to figure out whether we were going to move or use just the undesignated fund balance for the outside agencies.
no, the way you need to look at
But
it, you
you
got
just- yeah.
$1.9 million, and now that amount, how much you want to allocate for the outside, and then filter out, like Mr. Garza was telling you about, it goes to 80-20 deduction.
And what you're asking for us today is just to give you a number to put under the outside agency
Yes,
program?
yes, ma'am. In
Yeah.
the prior years, 2018 was 100, last year was 125, this year is the question mark.
I would like to
And,
move to,
I'm sorry.
I would like to make it 150,000 this year and no more. That's what my figure.
Well, I had a question in regards to the Main Street program. Is that based upon keeping the program as it is, not talking about absorbing that as a city function?
So we historically, or at least I guess recently, I should say, had allocated $75,000 to Main Street.
Correct.
So the idea is if we switch the setup, we would still allocate around that same amount of money towards it. I hope to have a more specific response to you by the time August comes around. Currently, we're having conversations about what that compensation would be. We want to be competitive, right?
Sure.
In attracting somebody for that position, and so it may be 75, it may be 80. I hope to have a more definite number for you by the time August comes around and the budget's approved. But because that 75 is already there, it doesn't really impact anything else.
Sure. No,
We
I
would
just-
simply, we would simply just shift it.
Correct.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you for the clarification.
I could support
Yeah.
Mrs. Solis's numbers. I was just running the quick calculation. It looks like those fund balances would drop to about $100,000, 120,000. So it'd be at 1.4 million compared to where it is projected this year at 1.1, so it'd still be going up. And the 380 would end up by $30,000 less
This
at
is the
350.
ending fund balance.
So it's an increase in that fund balance to keep our backstop.
You're still increasing your overall
Yeah.
position, so it doesn't hurt you. That's what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
It doesn't
I'd like
hurt, and I can support
I'd
that.
like 150 also.
Yeah. And for the benefit of the new council member, new mayor, obviously this is a process that's handled through Thomas's office. And so I know he's
Absolutely.
planning on going through a brief
I'm happy to talk about
summary of
the
that.
process. What I'm hearing so far is 3 council members who are supportive of the number 150. Are there others that are coalescing around that number, or are there
Well,
other suggestions?
I think we're not using hot funds. Hot funds is part of economic development, and I don't think we're looking at the possibilities. I once had a conversation with somebody about, they have rodeos in Gonzales, they have this in other towns. What about doing festivals in Riverside and using hotel motel money to build facilities in the park? I don't want to put the 150 there. I want to look at the other possibilities. We need to attract some other events here and use the money to make the park better, but we need to look at the possibilities. And I'd be happy with the 125.
And if I may, I think, I agree with you 100% though, that, I like the idea of thinking transformational as opposed to just transactional, but I think there's a way to do both. We currently as staff are having conversations about just some of the funding capacities that our hotel occupancy tax fund has. So I think there will be opportunities in the future to do both. I can tell you that it's not uncommon for cities to contribute towards arts funding processes or events or that sort of thing. A lot of cities have those types of programs and procedures. So that's not uncommon. But with our fund balance the way that it is and some of the capacity that exists even with the hot rate, there are some opportunities to have those conversations about transformational projects without impacting this. I'll give you an example. Currently, our hotel occupancy tax rate is 13%. There's opportunities there. I could tell you that other communities' hotel occupancy tax rates are 15, 16, or 17%. In Kingswood was 13%, and we approved the 2% venue tax to improve the exposition center in Kingsville. And so there are ways to kind of explore those options without impacting your day-to-day because of the capacity. So I think those conversations can still be had, I guess is my point.
Well, also, we have the ability to use hotel motel money. You're using it to fix a sports complex, right? In the CIP, there was a bunch of items at the very end that were fix the fields for certain fields.
Right.
Yeah.
This money could be used for that, right?
Yeah, hotel occupancy tax
Yes.
can be used for sports facilities, yeah.
We've done that in the past,
And-
but I'm sorry.
And
go
there,
ahead.
I was just gonna say that there was actually some changes too in this legislative session that just ended that helps, I guess, facilitate, for lack of a better word, utilizing hotel occupancy tax dollars for things like recreational and parks.
That's correct.
Expanding opportunities.
Expanding, yeah, that's another good word, right? Expanding opportunities, yeah. So absolutely, that could be part of it.
But still goes back to the planning stage, like you were all talking about. Everything combined is
Yeah.
one.
Well, and shameless plug, right? But, the idea of this assistant city manager that I've talked about that would supervise CBB and parks, downtown, perfect to kind of have conversations about all of those things together as opposed to having them separately. So I'll take any chance I get to plug that in. Because there's another one coming up that's planned too.
So, Mr. Mayor, I haven't yet heard a consensus on a specific dollar figure number. I'm happy to do my presentation on kind of how the process works. I know most of you are familiar with that already, but one of the critical questions that I'm going to be asked the first time that I put any information out about this program is how much money is available for the applicants. So I kind of need an answer to that question.
I got 125 and stay at 125. We were at 100 before that for years. And now you want to raise it to 150. I think this money could be better spent for other projects that would actually bring in sales tax into our.
We have two 150s and one 125.
Three 150s.
I was three 150s.
One to four, one,
Turns into an auction.
Yeah, I was just saying.
I agree with, I do appreciate the transactional and transformative. I've been a proponent of capital improvements in holding some money back so that we can improve Victoria from a long-standing standpoint versus an event. And the events are great. So I'm going to recommend we stay at 125.
I'm more comfortable at 125.
So you make me the tiebreaker.
Welcome to Mayor.
How about 135?
Wow. Split the baby.
137.5.
Yeah.
What I'm hearing, Mayor, is a consensus around at least 135.
No, around at least
If
125.
there would, well,
125.
trying to see.
Right.
You
I-
tried to
I'm-
sneak it in, but
No, I did, I thought
I'm
he
just
said
asking,
135.
would everybody consider 135 and move forward?
Yeah.
Yes.
Good compromise.
Okay.
I'm hearing consensus around that number.
But I do like the comment, Mr. Lofgren, about it is all about economic development. So let's not lose don't lose our eye on the ball.
Well, and I think once Thomas goes through the process, you realize to what extent even his process focuses on the actual impact that these events that are supported
That's right.
have.
Absolutely. And most of you are familiar with this project from prior years or from prior conversations about this project. I've gotten direct feedback from most of you about this. So to some extent, this discussion is for the benefit of the public who may not know what's going on here, and I will try to keep this exceptionally brief. The process that we use allows outside agencies, typically arts agencies, but it can be other types of agencies as well, to apply for funding from this designated $135,000. Those applications get submitted to my office. I'm proposing that we have a application open period of July 29th through August 9th. After those applications are submitted, they're reviewed in my office on an objective criteria basis. We're looking through the applications and through the applicant's history for things like how many hotel rooms they have generated, how much volunteerism there is in the community supporting the activity, what the attendance of the activity is, and we're scoring those events based on how successful they are within the community. The number one criteria there, according to direction I've received from council in the past, is how many hotel rooms are generated by that activity. We have a weighted scale that gives preference to that. After those objective scores are calculated, we call together the committee that you're appointing tonight that will review those applications themselves and do a subjective-based analysis based on the importance of that event to the criteria under which it falls. So how significant of an arts event is this, or how significant is this historic preservation? That committee also will then have an opportunity to review the objective scoring in case there are unusual outcomes. You know, anytime we assign numbers to something, I'm always afraid that you're going to run the risk that a pure mathematical analysis, sorry, Gilbert, is going to result in some unusual outcomes. And so I think it's important that the committee have the opportunity to weigh in to correct mathematical statistical aberrations. Those numbers are all combined in order to do a mathematical calculation of how much money gets assigned to each applicant based on their scores. Those who score higher get more money. I then bring those recommendations back to you in the form of a resolution that allocates all of that $135,000 to those agencies. They have an opportunity to appeal my recommendation. They know about it in advance. They're invited to come attend this meeting and make recommendations to you. That's the process we've used in the past. I think it's been very successful in the past. Obviously, it doesn't satisfy everyone, but in the meetings that I've had with the stakeholders, they have expressed a general level of satisfaction with the program. I'm recommending that we use the same program this year that we've used in the past, and that's what this resolution would approve, is us going forward in that way. Any questions? I'm happy to answer.
Well, I don't have a question, I have a comment. I would like to thank you, your staff, and the individuals that have served, and the 6 individuals that continue to serve, because that in itself is a thankless job as well. And they do great work and take it off, the burden off of us up here, who undoubtedly have a lot of work too.
I couldn't say it
So,
better myself.
it's
and
greatly
I appreciate
appreciated
your
from
recognition of my staff. I want to give a shout out to Katie Connolly in my office, who manages this project from an administrative level, and she does an outstanding level of work processing all of this. All right. Any other questions or comments?
Let me just ask one question.
Sure.
You know, in 1718, when we had allocated the 100,000 and we only used the 81,160, does that just go back to fund balance? Okay, it doesn't get reallocated to fund. We have to set that up. Okay, got it.
I move that we adopt item E1.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to adopt item E1. Any further discussion? Then I'll call for a vote. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Item E2, Mayor and Council, I have a substituted version of the guidelines and criteria. I sent you all an email earlier, and there is a copy of it on your desk in front of you. I apologize, I simply attached the wrong version to the agenda packet. We are not proposing any changes at all to the guidelines and criteria. These simply have to be readopted every 2 years in case we have a project come along that we want to give tax abatement to. So these sit on the books and wait for a project to come along. So item E2 is a resolution adopting guidelines and criteria for tax abatement agreements entered into by the City of Victoria and declaring an effective date.
So
Oh,
moved.
second.
Been moved and seconded. I would like to say that I did ask a question, since we're looking at enhanced economic development, that just because we pass this ordinance doesn't mean it has to stay that way for 2 years. It can be amended if we determine moving forward. So that's all I wanted to say about it.
That's correct. It does require a supermajority, 3/4 vote, but it can be amended midstream.
Okay. Any further discussion? If not, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed?
Item E3 is a resolution delegating certain purchase contract and grant authority to the city manager and declaring an effective date. And Mayor and Council, I also submitted a substituted version to you on this one. I neglected to include a provision that the mayor requested, which would not allow the city manager to enter into contracts with former members of city council unless that contract has been brought here for approval.
Really quickly, one of the items that was brought up at the last meeting was just in general, sort of some of our procedures. We have about a 75-page procurement manual that I'm glad I decided to not go through that tonight. But there is a quick reference matrix that we included in your read file. Just for context, I'll happily email you the overall overarching document. I just didn't think that a council meeting was a place to maybe go into the weeds of some of those things, and I'd be happy to have those conversations with you during our meetings. But you do have in front of you this quick matrix guide that just kind of is included in our manual that everybody uses to kind of help determine when quotes are required, when things have to be approved by the city manager, when things get approved by council. And hopefully, at minimum, this hopefully at least reassures the public that might be listening, and even some of you that may not be familiar with our policy, that we do require quotes when we're looking at some of these items, and that wouldn't change with this change. So the only thing that would change by this item being approved tonight would simply be that at the very right, where it says that the 25 to 50,000 has to be city council approved required would change.
And our list every month would get a little longer.
Absolutely, yeah, the list, good call, yeah, the list would
I
get a
move
little
to
longer.
adopt item E3.
Second.
It's moved and seconded to adopt item E3. Any other discussion?
Oh, yeah,
from
I got
council?
some. So on the former city council members, do you want to put a time limit on that?
That's what I was wondering, but it's kind of like, once on council, you're always tainted.
No, you wanna,
Does it specify which city? Maybe that guy that spoke earlier.
he was here.
He was here.
He was here.
He was here.
Dr.
Oh,
Stark.
yeah, I thought he mentioned being in another
No,
city council.
he was city council
Says
here.
you can't have a contract. It's just saying that it's open to
Yeah, it just
council
says it has to
approval.
be approved by council.
Right.
Okay.
One thing I would like is the handout we get, it needs to somehow be published. If it's in the minutes, I don't care. But I remember when I was sitting out in the audience, and I didn't even know that existed, and I had to request it from Thomas to see it. And it would be nice if it was a part of the minutes or something. It doesn't have to be
Yeah.
talked about, but.
And we could find a way to do that. I'll give you an example of how we did it in Kingsville. So in Kingsville, when we would put together the quarterly financial report, which is public and is put on the website, we simply attached a section to that quarterly financial report that included a listing of all of these items during that quarter. So there was a way for people to find it if they were interested in.
Why don't you just put it under section F from city manager reports attached to this?
I like his idea better because it saves paper.
Yeah, but all I want is it so that it's easily accessible to the.
Sure, understood. Yeah, understood.
And
And
whatever
we
way
could,
works
and we could,
best.
and we'll discuss how best to do that, absolutely. I could tell you that that's a trend that is sort of slowly but surely, cities are beginning to pick up. There's transparency stars, there's all sorts of things that cities push for to have some of this information more easily available, but.
Since I'm hearing some traction for that idea of perhaps a quarterly or some other time length report, I would encourage council to consider an amendment to this resolution that changes paragraph 4, because it currently says will be reported at the next council meeting. If you were to simply remove that time limit and
Well,
still require the
It's still
report.
Clarify,
report to us.
I don't envision changing anything in terms of the paper that they get here at the meeting. So they'll still
I
get this paper
understand.
here at the meeting.
Thank you, I
But for the
understand
benefit of the public, they can see it in the format of a different report
Right.
I understand. You would still be reporting each meeting
to
to council
council,
members.
right?
I understand. Thank you. I misunderstood what you said.
Any
I have
further
one-
oh,
I have a question. In the past, and I'm not saying that you did it or you're gonna do it, there were several times that a contractor, the contract would be split for less than the $25,000, but if you added them up, it was more than the $25,000, but it was entered on this report
Right.
as separate. You're increasing that figure is going to make sure that we don't have that happen again. I'm sorry, I'm just,
No, it's okay. Yeah.
okay? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly would not entice me to think creatively if my limit is 50,000.
Well, see, that's what I'm saying, you
Right.
know, because I don't think that, you know,
But
that was.
That's why we're
Just-
given that's why it needs to be for the public, and that's why we
And
need
quite
to have
frank,
it.
and quite
me-
frankly, just to clarify, or maybe that's what you're gonna do.
Yes, absolutely, please. If I may, I'd like to clarify. I know the concept you're describing. I'm unaware of any incident where it has happened that the city tried to avoid any bidding or procurement situation by serializing the contracts. And it is certainly part of my department's job to watch out for making sure that that doesn't happen. I understand your concern, and it is a more significant concern if we bump that threshold to $50,000 where the bidding laws
Right.
begin to apply.
But-
So I will just assure you that my department will be vigilant and watching for that.
Okay,
And
please.
just to clarify too, if it has happened in the past, it would have been a violation of the policy, but wouldn't have had necessarily been a violation of state law.
Right.
Because recall that state law is 50.
Oh, okay.
So it was simply the city policy that established that at 25. So if in the past you saw something that had a contract for 20 and another one was for 20, which equaled 40, yes, potentially that would have been a violation of our policy, but that 40 would have still been under the 50 that the state requires.
Okay.
So I just want to make it clear that if that did happen, it wasn't necessarily something that was against state law, maybe just something with our existing policy.
Okay.
but I hear there's assurance that that will be looked at.
I can promise you that we will be watching for that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second, but no vote.
All right, any further discussion on the matter? If you're hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed?
Item E4 is a resolution adopting an updated stormwater management program for the city of Victoria and declaring an effective date.
Move to adopt item E4.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Any discussion? I think, does Mr. Reese have anything for us?
He does
Or is
not.
just
No,
here?
I do not. I do not. Not on this item by any means.
So, if there's no, is there any discussion, any questions for Mr. Reese? If not, then I'll call for a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed?
City manager reports.
And then, do we
Point
take
of
a little
order,
break
was
or-
there a
Was there a
motion
motion?
and a second on
There
that?
was a motion and a
Yes, a
second on
motion
that.
and a
April, did you
Oh.
capture that?
He did the first.
Yeah,
Right.
it was just quiet, we didn't catch it over here.
I jumped the gun last time. Last meeting, but I'm trying to avoid that. You,
This is going to be a very quick presentation, I think.
yeah.
So-
Bless you.
We'll move on into our work session. So I'm officially going into a council work session from
Okay,
Maine.
so,
Take it
council,
away.
I placed a document in front of you, which y'all can reference as we move through this presentation, but as the city manager says, this is a very short presentation, and we'll try to move through it quickly. James? Oh, man.
Gilbert, did you touch that before the
Donald, it
meeting?
worked for me, I'm just saying.
I'm gonna set it down, James, you get this, let me know when I
Well,
take
just
back
run
over.
through the physical copy.
What's this one?
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Oh, here we go. So during the June 18th council meeting, council instructed us to come back with a few more options at the next council meeting. So those options included moving Lone Tree Acres residential street rehab project up into an earlier planning window, preferably 20 or 21. Of course, add the Leary Lane sidewalk projects to the 2020 plan year, and find a way to include residential street rehab project for Castle Hills West in the FY 2024 planning window, which is the entire window somewhere. To that end, James still not working again. There we go.
There we go.
Option one, we came up with three options. Option one is to move the Lone Tree Acres Street Rehab project from 2023 to 2020 to FY 2020 by funding it with TxDOT overpass reimbursement funds. And I think City Manager would like to kind of expound on that just a little bit.
Yeah, just briefly, you may recall at the last meeting, we brought forward an item that would speed up us receiving funds from TxDOT. And so that's going to create some capacity for us for some one-time usage for some special projects. We're still working on an overall recommendation on how to use those funds, but we already want to recommend one of the projects that we can move up and be funded through that exercise. One of the reasons why this project had originally been in fiscal year 2023 was because there's some drainage issues out there as well. And so staff believed and believes that if we simply address the street without addressing the drainage, it was just going to create an issue again. So really, this project, I want to kind of treat separately because it will be a more comprehensive project that includes some drainage solutions and some street work. And there might be some other things that we can do in the area just to help facilitate the fact that we do have a school close by, we have a fire station close by. And so I just want to kind of take that as a separate project and fund that through these other funds that won't compete with this. And then hopefully that addresses these concerns without impacting some of the other conversations that we're having. And you'll see this one bullet consistent across all three options that Donald will go through.
Correct. Okay, of course, in this option, we're going to add the Leary Lane sidewalk project into FY 2020, and then we'd add Castle Hills by splitting into three phases and constructing one phase in 2020, another one in 21, and the last one in 2022. Just a note, in this particular option, Leary Lane and Castle Hills West will be funded by removing all phases of both Woodway and Bridle Ridge in this particular option. Are there any questions on that? Okay, moving into option number two. Again, the first bullet point is the same. We're also looking to add Leary Lane sidewalk project in 2020. And then in this one, the main change is that we would add all the Castle Hills West street rehab projects into FY 2024 itself. In this particular option, it would allow us to get Leary Lane. Of course, we'd move Lone Tree Acres. We'd be able to move Castle Hills West and get it funded in this plan window. But we'd also be able to get both Woodway and Bridle Ridge would still be included in this particular plan. Any questions on that one? Okay, moving into option three.
Wait a minute.
Again-
What?
Yes, ma'am.
So the last option, you said you would remove phrases of Bridle Ridge, and in this one, you said there'd be no changes. No changes from what's planned now, or no changes from
No
option
changes
one?
from what was presented to you at the original CIP. Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
I thought so, but it just didn't look,
I
wanted to
understand.
confirm it.
Good point. Thank you. Okay, and finally, in option three, again, the same bullet point at the top. Again, we're adding Leary Lane. We're going back to adding Castle Hills West by splitting it into three phases and constructing it like we did in the first option, one in 20, one in 21, and one in 22. The only difference here is that Leary Lane and Castle Hills West will be funded by removing all phases of Woodway. And in Bridle Ridge, we would be able to fund it by removing the Lake Forest Reclaim Seal Project, which currently sits in 2023, and then by matching the four phases for Bridle Ridge to the available funding in each of those years. And what I mean by that is, for example, if in 2020 you have $800,000, you do $800,000 worth of work in Bridle Ridge. If you have 300 the next year, you do 300. And when you're done in 2023, because you're moving out Lone Tree Acres and you're also moving out Lake Forest, you have a large amount of money that you can finish Bridle Ridge up in 2023. So you're just making the project fit the available funding in this particular option. And that is the last slide I have. I told you it'd be quick, so I'm here to answer any questions or comments comments you may have.
Well, I'll start comments then. This is a tough decision for me and a tough thing to talk about. A lot of these areas are in my district, as they are in Mr. Lofgren's. I recognize the need for the Leary Lane sidewalk, but at the same time, those are funds that were taken away from existing infrastructure that needs to be repaired, and we're adding additional infrastructure with it. I understand the reasons why. So in my mind, I don't have that on the table because I'm not for adding additional infrastructure at this time until we get some things repaired. It comes to Woodway and it comes to Castle Hills West. Both neighborhoods are in bad shape. I want to double them both up. The only thing, Woodway, I think, as a business and a customer service perspective, we screwed up the roads. We absolutely messed up those roads. We learned a big lesson from them, but those roads are just in the same condition as Castle Hills West, but they weren't until we messed it up. If I'm looking at it from a business perspective, that neighborhood, we owe it to them first to fix their roads because we made the mistake. And Castle Hills are just old streets and are deteriorating, and they aren't a mistake made by the city. And for that, I'd like to keep the Woodway phase like it was. Let's find a way to keep digging at it. Let's get Castle Hills West back in there. And I don't want to do Leary Lane as additional infrastructure to add.
How much money is in that fund we're getting back from the agreement on TxDOT?
From the TxDOT?
Yeah.
Oh, it's gonna be greater than 6, I think. Greater
$6
than
million?
6 million.
After
But
you-
keep in mind that,
After you pay the bonds off, is
correct, yeah. But keep in mind that we're working on some recommendations as an example. One of the things that we're discussing is putting $1 million of that into our health insurance fund to increase the fund balance, as an example. So there are other needs that we have outside of infrastructure that we want to take advantage of these one-time dollars that we have at our disposal, if you will. We anticipate that the Lone Tree project that I mentioned earlier could be, the street work alone was about 1.2, but once we include drainage in there, it could easily get to 3 from that. So while yes, ultimately it's your decision on how you want to use that money, I would ask and request that we have that discussion when we can come forward with a plan on, we think it's best to invest $1 million in the health insurance fund balance as an example, which is an issue and everybody knows it's an issue, and other things that we might think is appropriate just for discussion's sake.
And the one I didn't touch on, that was a good option for Lone Tree Acres. Thank you.
Well, my only point is if we screwed it up, then maybe we can do a one-time to help remedy that, or a portion of it.
is it in phases? Is Woodway in phases?
Yes, ma'am, it'd be in
Yes.
phases. For example, in that option number 2, we'd started in 2020, then you'd have a second phase in 2021, and then 2023, I believe, is the final phase. Yes, ma'am.
If you took
But
off,
that's in this option. But currently, if nothing changes,
Currently, if nothing changes, you would be doing phase 1 and 2 in 2020, and then phase 3 the following year.
Part
I
of it-
personally like option 2.
I was just going to say that there are parts of Woodway, there are parts of Castle Hills that are in good shape. And I know that we phase and we like to get in there and get done.
like to knock
And
Leary Lane
well,
off.
compared to Tanglewood, they are a level surface that you're driving on. And to me, I mean, part of public health, safety, and welfare is whether or not you're able to drive. Yes, they're noisy, and yes, you have to dodge, but they're still paved and
I know, and
level.
it's hard to compare it to Tanglewood because I think Tanglewood
Right.
would have already been up on the list if it weren't for the
Yeah,
utilities.
it would have been.
If it weren't for what?
Utilities.
Utilities, it would have been on the list.
And
Right.
just
It would have been ahead of all these.
Right.
How much is Leary Lane? I mean, the sidewalk.
The sidewalk's about 625, I think. And that's, keep in mind that 625 if we have to close the ditch. If we can get some participation, we might be able to knock 150,000 off of that. But that would be private participation.
Was that something one-time money could do?
Yes, it's
Well-
one time.
yeah, I mean, ultimately, y'all can choose to do whatever you want with that money.
I mean, it doesn't diminish it as much. I'm just trying to find a way to accelerate some of this work if at all possible.
And this is gonna be a challenge every year, too.
I know it will be.
Well, I agree with Mr. Bachnight about Leary Lane. And to me, we should be fixing streets before we're putting the sidewalk in. And if that money could go to Woodway, great. People need to realize that Bridle Ridge was also ruined. It wasn't just Woodway. Nobody from Bridle Ridge was here, but Bridle Ridge was also ruined. So I would prefer to go with option number 3, but take Leary Lane off and see what you can do in Woodway.
So we're going to take paved streets that people have to drive slowly on because they're bumpy and have holes in them, and we're going to improve that over having any place for children, not adults in big cars, children to be walking. We want them to continue to walk in the street.
Well, I brought that up about Dairy Road, and you wanted to do a different street instead of Dairy Road. It's,
Right.
I mean, it's,
There's a,
we have to pick our things here.
I like the idea of a one-time expense for that Leary Lane sidewalk. It's been talked about for years and years and years. And because I think at some point in time, we're gonna have to have a big discussion overall about sidewalks in Victoria.
does that, would Leary Lane sidewalk qualify in the bonds that we would be issuing in the future for roads? It would. So it does have hope at the end of the tunnel if we continue to put it off. I'd still like to
And
do
real
it,
quick,
but-
and to the mayor's point, I thought there had already been like a sidewalk assessment done by staff. I've seen the map.
Yeah, we've done a sidewalk assessment.
Yeah.
We were kind of trying to prioritize it. It's fallen on the wayside, for lack of a better term, just for other priorities.
Okay. Because I know that one of the recommendations that came from that 2035 plan, I think that's where that came from, right?
I believe, yes, sir.
One of the action items for staff out of that 2035 comprehensive plan was to look at an assessment of sidewalks. And so I know they've done that because I've seen the map in your office. To what extent has that been presented to council?
Well, when we did the assessment, it's basically a map of where, right now, it's just a map of where there are sidewalks and where there aren't sidewalks. And we were to the point of trying to prioritize the needs. But as far as assessment of going out and physically doing like a sidewalk inventory, that has not been done.
Got it.
Back to the text out money, you said it would, is there more than enough to fund that project?
Is it more than enough to fund which project?
The Lone Tree Acres?
There's enough money to fund the Lone Tree Acres project. The problem is that at this point, it's too early on to know exactly how much that's
don't know
gonna
how
be.
much.
We just had a meeting this past week with our city engineer to start looking at how much would it cost to solve the drainage issues out there. There's some easement challenges, so we don't know to what extent that's gonna impact. So the cost figure behind the Lone Tree Acres is a question mark, which is why we're kind of hesitant to kind of just say, oh yeah, just use up this for whatever you want. So we would feel more comfortable getting a figure around that project so that we can come back and saying, okay, you have $6 million, 3 or 4 of that's gonna go to Lone Tree Acres, $1 million of that we wanna put into the insurance fund balance, and other things. Other things that we're discussing internally is even investment in parks as an example. We've got some money in the budget to do a design of the duck pond, but there's no money anywhere in sight to actually fix it and do it. So we're having conversations internally about, well, maybe we need to allocate some of this money from TxDOT towards parks-related projects, some of which we know now, some of which we may not know now.
Could hotel motel money be used for the duck pond?
I'm sure it could if it's a park. I don't know to what extent, right? But I don't know.
Well, probably in all reality, if you pull the Leary Lane, it wouldn't be enough to allow you to do one or the other. That's the
Right.
problem.
Because even if
It's gonna not make you have enough to do both Castle
Wait.
Hills and Woodway.
True.
That's the point I was gonna make. It's 625,000 versus 3 million for Woodway and
Yeah.
5.8 for Castle Hills West and,
Yeah, but Woodway was phases. How much was one phase of Woodway?
it's 1.3. Do you have that first phase? In 2020?
So you need 700,000 if you didn't do Leary Lane.
Gilbert, you want to add something?
Well, I want to remind council that we did get the money on tax stuff, but you remember we still got a contract with the county side that we get annual payments for the overpass. We still got 4 more years of those. There might be some talk sometime near future, maybe they want to have a discount rate, maybe they pay it all off. And that's slightly over $1 million. So they still got that money on the side still to be
Coming in
accounted
the
for.
future.
But what y'all talking about now, you still focus on that $9.7 million. And I have some money still in cash that we have not spent too, so that's another $1 million. So you got about 10. The bonds is about $3.1 million to pay off. So I still suggest the idea that let Mr. Garza come back with a plan to you, because I think everybody be happy once he has able to gather all the data and get the numbers, construction, and I think he will have a good plan in how we can adapt some of this Leary Lane, for example. So that's just my 2 cents.
Thank you.
So do we have to make are you on a consensus tonight of which option we want or not?
Well, this is the 3rd time I think that we have this conversation, and so I don't know how many times we need to put it on the agenda to get some
Okay, well, I'm just
consensus
saying,
on,
so you want us to give you what we want tonight?
well, at least for the next fiscal year.
Yeah, back on May 21st, I think we were looking for FY 2020 and 2021. I think we'd be happy with 2020 tonight. Just so we have some direction.
And remember, this presentation shows option 1, 2, and 3, but it doesn't show you the original.
The original option, I was going to ask.
Well, what,
It's
were they in this thing?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, because
Were
it
they
doesn't
here?
show the amounts.
I'm sorry.
Somebody want to tell us what they were originally?
Yeah, can you summarize the
Well,
existing?
Yeah, if I go back to just the 2020,
before you do that, how much are the phases of Castle Hills West? Because that wasn't in there originally.
Castle Hills West is about 1.933 per year, per phase. If you're just taking it, it's not designed, so it's about 5.8 total, just divided by 3. So if we're looking at just the street rehab projects for 2020, of course, we're talking about North Heights still, Woodway Phase 1, which is the very back, Woodway Phase 2, which is the middle, Bridle Ridge Phase 1, which is kind of the west side, and that is pretty much the residential street rehab projects. Is that, so there's the North Heights, Woodway Phase 1, 1.23. Uh-oh. Now that was just, I need the CIP one. Yeah, CIP one, so. I had some of them, sorry. Almost got you there.
20?
That was all in 2020.
I'm not finding them.
Those earlier seal coats are still in?
Yeah, all the maintenance,
All the
all the
maintenance
maintenance
is
are
in?
still
Okay.
in. So right now, we're just talking about, and then of course, anything funded by sales tax we weren't looking at. This is just strictly the general fund and the COGO bond, street rehab projects.
And is the back of Woodway where the real problems are?
Actually, the Woodway, if you're looking at the map that's up there right now,
Phase 3.
it's Phase 3, it's Chimney
Right.
Rock. But it's phased like that because
Right.
you don't wanna take your heavy equipment over what you just fixed to fix
Could
the
it
other
have been
phases.
phased this way instead of this way, or this way? Oops.
It might be able to. I'd have to take another look at it. I'm
Because-
looking at the way the entrances are laid out,
Right.
and that's kind of how we're doing our phases. Because you have Phase 1 is there off of 87 on is that Woodridge, and then your other one, is Railwood, and so that would get you into Phase 2, and then you'd finish off Phase 3 coming in on Railwood also.
On your option 3, you say, note, Leary Lane and Castle Hills West would be funded by removing blah, blah, blah. Bridle Ridge would be funded, is that all of Bridle Ridge or just one phase?
Bridle, on option 3, no, that'd be all of Bridle Ridge would be funded by fitting the project to the dollar amount you have available in each year. And then at the last year, which would be FY 2023, you have some money coming open because you've moved out Lone Tree Acres, and we moved out Lake Forest Reclaimed Seal also. And so you had enough money to finish all phases of Bridle Ridge in that.
And Bridle Ridge would be done in what years then?
It would start in 2020 and finish out through 2023.
How much does Bridle Ridge cost? in a phase?
Total Bridle Ridge.
The
I'm
first
sorry.
the first phase.
First phase of Bridle Ridge?
Because you could substitute Bridle Ridge for Woodway. And if there's a difference, you could take Leary Lane off of there.
I think we need to have conversations just in general. So basic, or not basic, but question, right? What is the council's opinion on even moving Woodway at all?
Well,
Right.
Castle Hills Castle Hills West, if you look at the street ratings and you actually drive the neighborhoods, Castle Hills West streets are worse than Woodway's and they're worse than Bridle Ridge. Their streets are not good. I agree with them and I understand their position, but the streets are worse in these other neighborhoods. So, in fact, there's more, if Tanglewood could be done now, we would be doing Tanglewood.
I'm going to ask a bright-eyed, very naive question. With Woodway, you said you've got it phased because you want the trucks to not drive over the new street,
That's correct.
and that makes sense. You also said you phased it based on the entrances.
We tried to, yes, ma'am.
So why can't you do the worst part, which I think is the front, and when you get to the back, they come in on whatever that is, Woodhaven or Woodridge, as opposed to coming in across the new property, or across the new roads?
Because if you did phase 2, if I'm reading you right, you do phase 1, the very southern part, and then you do phase 2, and then you do.
Middle part.
Is the middle.
Is the middle
Right.
part. So
Go
you
the
either have
opposite
to,
direction.
you either have to come in on Railwood, or you have to come in on, off of Briggs Boulevard, and you'd be driving over phase 1 to get to phase 2. Because phase 2 is the middle.
Okay, unless either Briggs or Railwood was not part of Phase 1
Yeah.
and became the entrance for Phase 2.
Yeah.
Done this.
That's
you
why I
could-
said it's bright-eyed and naive, but
explained
is
before.
that
I'm,
something workable?
we could possibly try to work with just about anything you want us to.
If I may, phasing is a very difficult thing to do. I've been involved in very complex projects, and phasing them, you would think it would be an easy thing to do, but you can appreciate what I'm talking about. Something that appears so simple, there's one element that you can't change that precludes you from doing that. So all I can say is I would assume that staff has looked at all of those issues about phasing,
Well,
because it isn't as easy as you think.
But the one aspect is we've got people in Woodway that are upset
Oh, I
because the
know.
roads are in bad condition.
know.
So what are we going to do? We're going to go in and not fix the part that's the worst.
Right.
Now, that doesn't look very
I agree.
I
user-friendly, smart, all kinds of other things.
I understand what you're saying, and
And we would get a lot more
Yeah.
satisfaction and satisfied customers if we deal with those aspects of it.
And to be honest with you, Castle Hills West, there's part of Castle Hills West that's really bad, and there's other parts that could be put off. King Arthur and, can't think of the name of the street, Guinevere, need to be done first. And they could be done in one phase. Those other phases could be put off. And some phases in Woodway could be done. To me, I agree with Councilman Scott, the worst parts of the areas need to be done first. In fact, in a lot of our neighborhoods, if you look, the worst parts are the places that go in and out, and maybe we should look at fixing those. We can't fix all the neighborhoods. I once took the street inventory and sorted it. There were 111 neighborhoods, and there were 27 that needed really to be fixed. But a lot of those neighborhoods, it's only There are certain streets that are really bad, and they're usually the streets that go in and out of the neighborhoods. And if we could fix those,
Let me just,
I'd be happy
yeah,
if you
let me
fix
just
King
jump in.
Arthur.
Let me just jump in here real quick and just be real frank with you.
Sure, please.
From an engineering standpoint and a constructability standpoint, staff feels that we presented you with the best options. If there's something else that council would like to do, by all means, let us know and we'll get it done.
Mayor, may I ask a procedural question? This is, I think, the third time we've had this same discussion at a council meeting. And just observing the room, I don't think we're any closer to a consensus than we were at the beginning. Would it be supported by council members to simply put this to a vote? Would council members support the plurality decision of council, knowing that you're never going to all agree? It may be simply time to vote and see which one of these options has the most support. If council could at least agree to support the most popular opinion or most popular decision, then we could begin to narrow down the discussion.
I think that's the only way we're gonna get anywhere.
I think, like I said, we can sit here till 9 o'clock, and I think there's two opinions, two sets of opinion. One thing I would like to interject at this point, moving forward, I would hope that next year we have a more interactive process as we move forward on these things, where we can discuss them, in work sessions and stuff, but not here at the last minute when they have to be decided to be included. And I don't know if that's possible.
Sure.
When you,
I mean,
when
it's
you
always,
start
it's
talking
always
about it.
possible to start the
But that's what the
conversation
council
sooner.
can
But I also
decide.
think, but I also think it's important that council realize too, that as Donald suggests, the options that are presented to you are based from a professional, engineering, constructability, viewpoint. And so I do think at some point, and this is a conversation for another day, is we need to have conversation about what is the policy direction of council as it relates to streets? Because the idea of council being involved with designing this phase here and that phase there and this or that, that's a little too into the weeds of what the role of city council is. What I'm sensing is that one of the council members would like us to just revisit completely what our policy has been, to a degree, which we can have that conversation. But I just want to make it clear that the options that are presented by staff have already been vetted. We've already come to you several occasions, and to change everything completely now would not be wise in my opinion. If we want to have more thorough conversations leading up to next year about changing the policy direction for streets, or about, the assessment that we're going to go through, et cetera, we'd be happy to do that.
Well, let's have a work session, we can discuss it.
And we could do that leading up into next year to have a more thorough conversation. But from my standpoint, the conversation council should be having is about policy direction and not so much helping the professionals figure out which phase is better.
And my
To
point,
start first.
I'd like to make a suggestion. Let's vote on the options that we want by ballot, secret ballot, whatever you want to do.
Secret, yeah.
There won't be secret
Text
ballots, we don't do
message,
that.
yeah.
I don't care
Text,
how you-
American
But
Idol,
then
yeah.
you take
so-
the top two, and then we actually vote on the top two after that.
Yeah.
Because if there's three options, the votes can get split
Well,
a lot of
there's-
ways.
There's
honestly-
four options. There's the original option.
each council member.
There's the
That's
original
true,
option.
That's true.
For a
That's-
Just do it out
consensus.
loud and get it over with.
Do it out
Yeah.
loud.
Do it out
And
loud.
then if we move on, maybe we can streamline the process next year. But as I said, for us to sit here and try to phase things, I can tell you from personal experience, it is not as easy as you would think it would be. I've done it my whole life, and it takes a lot of time to sit there and think through these things. So for now, I think the best deal we can do is move forward and then come together as a group after we're done here and work on these issues. Because like you say, the information may change when some of these studies are done. Because I think that's critical in that more forensic studies I can tell you, I'm going to a Texas Municipal League conference, and one of the items on that list is grading streets. So it's not something that's unique to us.
Yeah.
So I
So,
think,
Mayor, if I may recommend a procedure, and I don't want to cut off any dialogue, other than the fact that it's now 8:20. If there are important things to be said, we can still have dialogue. But my recommended process at this point will be everyone decide which of the 4 options you are most in favor of, the one originally presented by staff or one of the options presented tonight. And we'll just go down the table and vote. I'll tally. If one of them gets a plurality, council agrees that we'll support that one. If there's a tie for the greatest number of votes, then we'll have a runoff. All right? So starting at this end of the table, because you're number 1, Ricky.
Option 2 for tonight.
Option 2, that's 1 vote.
Option 2.
Option 2.
I'd like the original plan
Original
with the Lone Tree Acres as part of the text dot overpass. But
Was that the original plan, or is that an amendment to
Well,
the original plan?
because
that's
it's in the
across all
future.
the boards.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm
But the
marking that as
original plan
original.
didn't even have Lone Tree Acres next fiscal year, so it won't impact
And it didn't
the
have,
next year.
it didn't have Castle Hills West at all.
District 4 is Jan Scott. Sorry, I'm skipping you, Mayor. I'll come back to you.
hopefully you won't need me.
I'm comfortable with the original plan.
The original plan, District 5.
It kills me because there's so many roads that need to be fixed, but I am comfortable with the original plan.
Original plan. Mr.
It's
Lofgren?
funny because you all wanted Castle Hills West back on it, but you all want the original plan, and the original plan didn't have Castle Hills West on it.
Right.
I'm for option 2, whether I'm the lone vote or not.
And just for clarification's sake, we would be proceeding with doing, with if, whatever option it is, for next year. We can always reconvene and have a conversation next year.
We will.
Right. So what you're committing for tonight is not sort of stuck in stone, carved in stone, that, you know, the next 5 years are going to look the way that that option has them.
And final vote, Mr. Mayor.
You're the tiebreaker again.
Again, well, I can't split this one. That's not an option here.
It's appropriate. The mayor represents the entire city.
Well, I'm going to default to those that have been here through the process longer than myself at this point, and probably go back to the original plan, but that's not to say I'm happy with the process. And I think moving forward, we can do better to get more into it. I want to look at different funding options aggressively to move this forward, because I can tell you, all through getting elected, all I heard about was streets, streets, streets. But I also know that streets aren't our only problems. I mean, we talk about this CIP program in terms of streets, but there's a whole host of other capital projects that we need to address as all. So I would hope in doing this that, you know, I'm gonna go with those that have been here and default to their knowledge of the plan. But I do hope that moving into the next year, we can develop another process where we can get a little bit more involved, where it doesn't come down to kind of the last minute.
So as I record that as a 4-3 vote in favor of continuing with the recommendation proposed by staff, and I
Lone
appreciate
Tree
council allowing me to wade in and make some procedural maneuvering there to drive this towards an answer. These are hard answers, and I appreciate everyone's recognition that we don't have to be unanimous all the time. Thank you.
Waiting for you, Raleigh.
There we go.
Awesome.